subcommittee will please come to order. As the subcommittee continues with its series of hearings on the crisis at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, certain patterns are developing. We see HUD Secretary Pierce, much like the Maytag repairman, sitting in his office with little to fix, waiting for the phone to ring, for someone to tell him that some of the HUD programs were out of order and needed major repairs. According to Mr. Pierce, the phone never rang. We see the Section 8 moderate rehabilitation program in total disrepair, being riddled with blatant favoritism, political influence, and abuse in the distribution of hundreds of millions of dollars of low-income rent subsidies and tax benefits. We see a series of handwritten Dear Debbie letters from developers, consultants, attorneys, and others who stood to gain significantly from moderate rehabilitation program funding decisions made by HUD, blind copies of applications for rent subsidy funds being sent to Deborah Dean, numerous meetings by consultants and developers with Ms. Dean, and by extraordinary coincidence, the applications pushed by these individuals being approved by HUD. We see many individuals who were ideologically opposed to federal housing programs benefiting financially from the program, and when called before the subcommittee, becoming born-again advocates for low-income housing and singing the praises of the program. At today's hearing, we will be questioning Mr. Fred Bush, Ambassador-designate to Luxembourg, about how his firm came to be awarded a $268,000 technical assistance grant for a project in San Juan, Puerto Rico, over the strong objections of career staffers at HUD who believed that Mr. Bush's firm was totally unqualified. It appears that Mr. Bush's firm paid more than $200,000 of the funds from the grant to an apparently qualified company that could actually perform the work that was required. It makes one wonder why HUD didn't just hire the company which could perform the services itself and eliminate the middleman. We will also be hearing testimony today from Mr. William Connolly, Director of Housing for New Jersey, about how that state agency, at the urging of the consulting firm of Black, Manafort, Stone, and Kelly, and apparently without any input from the local community of Upper Deerfield, New Jersey, came to apply to HUD for 326 units and received these much-in-demand units. The state then solicited bids from developers by placing a single ad in the Melville Daily, not to be confused with the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. To no one's surprise, only one company could meet these tailor-made requirements. Only one company responded to the bid, and these units were awarded to Seabrook Apartments, in which Mr. Paul Manafort was a partner. Our third witness will be Mr. Hunter Cushing, a former HUD Deputy Assistant Secretary for Multifamily Housing Programs and a former assistant to HUD Secretary Sam Pierce. He should be able to provide critical first-hand information about a wide range of HUD programs in which he played a pivotal role, including his actions that apparently deprived the federal government of over $500,000 to which it was entitled in connection with the Cypress Mill Plantation project in Georgia. Tomorrow, the subcommittee will be holding its first hearing on the problem-plagued co-insurance program at HUD. Our series of hearings on HUD will continue after Congress returns from the 4th of July district work period, and our first witness after 4th of July, who is scheduled to appear on July 11, will be Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Jack Kemp. Congressman Lukens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think basically we've established, thanks to the Chairman's doggedness and determination, beyond any shadow of a doubt, the extent of the misuse and abuse, if not outright corruption, of the system within HUD. And the sooner we get to further questioning, probably the more information we can bring to the committee. Therefore, I yield the time I have to the question of witness.
Thank you very much, Congressman Weiss.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's hard to improve on your characterization of Secretary Pierce. I think that you have it exactly right. It does remind me, however, of the testimony of Mr. Abrams, who was the Deputy Secretary and was at times, very often, the acting secretary, as we established. And in the course of his testimony, you asked him what his job was and why he didn't seem to have very many responsibilities. And he said, well, his role was sort of like the Vice President's role. And I guess there are many similarities between the Reagan presidency and the Pierce secretaryship. Certainly the Tao report described the president as being detached and disengaged, and I think that that probably characterizes Mr. Pierce as well. As far as Mr. Abrams, who was his immediate second in command, he seemed to have been out of the loop a great deal of the time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Congressman Kyle, Congressman Shays, Congressman Schumer.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for expanding this, for continuing your drive to expose all of the excesses in HUD, for your leadership, and again for your graciousness inviting some members of the Housing Committee to sit in. Mr. Chairman, the American people are becoming more and more shocked as we discover that an agency to help the poor became, during the Reagan years, a giant cookie jar for well-connected developers. And I think these hearings have clearly shown that, though, that this committee and this Congress is stepping up with Secretary Kemp to meet the challenge of restoring the agency to its original purpose, helping the nation find affordable shelter. Clearly, the road to restoration will be long and sometimes difficult, but we have no alternative. Let those who wish to use these hearings as an excuse to end these kinds of programs know that we stand resolute to fix them and to continue them. We must maintain this nation's commitment to low-income housing, and we must ensure that the government's housing dollars will be well spent. Simply put, we must patch the holes in HUD's bucket before pouring in any more money. Mr. Chairman, we have seen two epidemics in this investigation: an outbreak of selective amnesia and another of chronic finger-pointing. Highly intelligent witnesses who have extraordinary memories for most events suddenly seem to have little recollection of their participation in HUD programs. And while many of our witnesses hold very responsible positions in government and business, somehow someone else was entirely responsible for any abuses of HUD's programs. I hope that today's witnesses, particularly Frederick Bush and Hunter Cushing, will summon from within the ability to fend off these epidemics and provide straight answers to our questions about what went on at Secretary Pierce's HUD. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our first witness is Mr. Hunter Cushing, former Deputy Assistant Secretary for Multifamily Housing at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Mr. Cushing, if you'll raise your right hand, you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Please be seated. Would you like to identify the person with you?
Yes, this is Jamie Gorelick, who's my attorney.
Yes. We're pleased to have you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Cushing, if you have any prepared statement, it will be entered into the record in its entirety. You may proceed in your own way.
Mr. Chairman.
Just a moment, counsel. I'm addressing Mr. Cushing.
I have no statement at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Are you requesting me to recognize your counsel?
Oh, yes. Yes, I believe my counsel has.
Pull the mic close to you, please.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would appreciate it if you would recognize my counsel that has a request.
Counsel may proceed.
Mr. Chairman, we respectfully request some additional time before Mr. Cushing's testimony. I have only recently been retained and have not had an adequate opportunity to review the facts in this case, which are quite complex, as you know. I need to be in a position to advise Mr. Cushing as your rules provide. Mr. Cushing is here.
Could you pull both mics?
I'm sorry.
Very close to the other one, too.
Mr. Cushing is here today voluntarily, and he will voluntarily appear before this committee after its July 4th recess if our request is granted.
Well, Mr. Cushing, this subcommittee has bent backwards in every single instance to accommodate reasonable requests of witnesses. Am I to understand that as of today you are unprepared to testify because your counsel has not yet reviewed all of the materials that are relevant to your testimony?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Am I to understand that the week after the 4th of July recess, both you and your counsel will be ready for your testimony?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
The chair is inclined to grant the request of the witness because we want to be sure that both witness and counsel are fully prepared. Are there any members of the subcommittee who would like to make a comment or a contrary observation?
Mr. Chairman, I wish to support the chairman in his decision and just simply make this observation. We've had many witnesses come in prepared with voluminous materials, but they seem somehow to miss the boat in terms of the timing of certain decisions, the timing of certain events. I would just ask, with the chair's indulgence, that you and your counsel pay particular attention to the timing of events, because this has been very critical in much of our testimony. Many people said they didn't exactly remember. We understand that some things cannot be recalled, but we would like to get a sense of the timing of decisions. That's very critical in some of the decisions made to grant these development monies.
Congressman Weiss?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Congressman Kyle? Congressman Martinez? Congressman Shays? Congressman Schumer?
Yeah, just one point, Mr. Chairman. As you probably know, that many of the people, particularly the Secretary, who have come before us have just had a litany of I don't remember, I don't recall, etc. And the Chair is being very, very generous in his support. There are certain obvious questions that could be asked without any preparation at all, as I'm sure you realize. And so what I would ask, and I certainly will go along with the Chairman's decision, is that when you come fully prepared, and we just don't hear the constant refrain, I can't remember, I don't recall, etc. And that would at least make this member feel a little more comfortable with the decision.
Mr. Cushing, you are excused until you are called, which will be during the first week after the 4th of July recess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your appearance.
Thank you.
Next witness will be Mr. Fred Bush, who is again appearing on a voluntary basis. This is his second appearance before the subcommittee. Mr. Bush, if you raise your right hand, you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Please be seated. Would you like to identify counsel?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'd like to introduce Warren Miller, my counsel.
We are pleased to have you, Mr. Miller.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, why don't we begin by having Mr. Bush pull that microphone all the way over in front of him and all the way up to his mouth.
It's a very good idea.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It's a very good idea. Mr. Bush, your entire prepared statement will be entered in the record. You may proceed in your own way.
I'd like to read it if you would give me that
Please.
permission, please. Thank you. I'm pleased to have this opportunity to once again appear before the subcommittee. I have with me today, as I already have told you, my attorney, Warren L. Miller, Esquire, of the firm of Reed Smith, Shaw & McClay. As you will recall, at the close of my testimony during my last appearance, I stated that my memory on several questions posed by the committee was vague because of the many years that have gone by, and I needed to refresh my recollection by talking in depth to my former associates at Bush & Company, which I had not done prior to the first hearing. Particularly, I said that I needed to talk with them about the initial stages of our HUD activity in order to be in a position to fully answer your questions. In hindsight, I now realize I had not sufficiently prepared for the initial hearing, and I did not fully appreciate the importance of an in-depth preparation for it. Following the first hearing, I retained my present counsel, and my attorneys and I had an opportunity to speak with my former partners about our HUD activities. With this background, I wish to make a few clarifying statements of my earlier testimony. First, over the course of 4 years, either myself or my partners had numerous contacts by telephone or in person with officials of HUD on many projects. These individuals included, among others, Deborah Dean, Hunter Cushing, Du Bois Gilliam, Carl Kovitz, Janice Golek, and others. Secondly, during my first appearance before the committee, several members
Could you please identify these individuals in terms of the position they held at the time you made contacts with them at HUD?
May I finish my statement and I go back to that?
I think it'd be more helpful if you did it now.
I don't know all the titles at the particular time because some people changed titles.
But
Deborah
describe
Dean
their
was
jobs.
executive assistant to the secretary. Hunter Cushing held several jobs. I don't know all the titles. I believe Du Bois Gilliam was assistant secretary.
In what context did you deal with Hunter Cushing?
I explained that in my testimony,
All right.
sir. Carl Kovitz was, at one time, I believe, undersecretary. Janice Golek was a deputy assistant secretary. I'll start now. Second, during my first appearance before the committee, several members expressed skepticism about how we first met Deborah Gordine. It was not a subject I had thought much about prior to my testimony, and I did my best to remember how we first met her. This remains a difficult subject to recall even today, given the fact that 4 years have transpired since the initial contact with her. As I previously stated, I've now had an opportunity to talk with my former colleagues at Bush & Company. They have told me of their best recollection. Sometime in late 1984 or early 85, one of my colleagues met Hunter Cushing at a social gathering, and he learned that he worked at HUD. At that time, the Los Alamitos project had come to us from a developer named Mr. Gomez, and my colleague asked Mr. Cushing who we should talk to at HUD about this type of project. My colleague's recollection is that Mr. Cushing told him we should talk to Deborah Gordine. My colleague came to me and asked if I knew Miss Dean. I said that I did not. I then consulted a copy of the Federal Executive Directory, and I have a copy of that page, which I'd be glad to show the committee.
Well, if I may stop you here, because I think it's extremely important that we have this different version, which to the chair appears to be a dramatically more plausible version than your initial testimony to the subcommittee. Let me read the transcript of the initial hearing, Ms. Bush. Mr. Lantos, what we are concerned with is influence peddling. And since you clearly have no technical expertise for which people are ready to pay you, it had to be for either real or imaginary relationships. Now, since you picked Miss Dean's name from the directory, it was a fiction that you had a relationship. Mr. Bush, I had no relationship, and so on. Your initial testimony was that you merely opened the directory and found Ms. Dean's name listed as executive assistant to the secretary. You are now changing that testimony, and what you are saying to the committee now is that your colleague recalls that Mr. Hunter Cushing told him that you should talk to Deborah Dean.
That's correct.
And that is how you pursued.
When I answered the question the first time, I was not aware of that. The only thing I remembered, and I remember today, is using this executive directory, which I did on numerous occasions, and I still do.
Well, is the committee to understand, Ms. Bush, that you are now not giving your own recollection of how you got to Ms. Dean, but you are merely conveying your colleague's recollection? You still have no recollection that the name was suggested to you not by merely opening the directory, but by a meeting you folks had with Mr. Cushing, who suggested that it is Ms. Dean who is the person you should see?
We did not have a meeting, Congressman, with Mr. Cushing. One of my colleagues met Mr. Cushing at a social gathering. I was not at the social gathering.
I understand
All right.
that.
They had a discussion.
Yes? And it related to one of your Puerto Rican projects.
They had never met before.
Yes.
The subject of what, I assume they said, where do you work? Well, I work at HUD. Oh, we have a project. Who do we talk to about this particular project?
Yes.
You should talk to Ms. Dean. My colleague came to me and said, I've been told we need to talk to Ms. Dean. And I said, who is Ms. Dean? And we pulled out this directory and we called her.
I understand that, but you called her because Mr. Cushing suggested she is the person to see.
I called her because my colleague suggested to me that Ms. Dean was the person. He is the person who remembers talking to Mr. Cushing. I don't, because I never did.
I grasp that. I am merely establishing the fact, and I suspect you agree with me, that the testimony this morning is a total variance with your earlier testimony. Your earlier testimony indicated that you merely opened the directory and found that name there.
Sir, on page...
Now we find that the name was suggested to your associate by Mr. Cushing, which is a far more plausible explanation.
You just bear with me. On page 237 of my testimony, starting in line 57, 56, I believe I said to Mr. Morrison, without going back and talking to my colleagues about the beginnings of this project, which have been years ago, I have not discussed this part of it with them. I could not say categorically that someone, either one of my colleagues or someone else, told either one of my colleagues or me, call Deborah Dean. I do not remember that as being the case. I do remember consulting a directory. Now, I wouldn't say categorically no one ever told us that until I had an opportunity to talk with my colleagues, and maybe they would be able to refresh my memory. So it's not exactly in variance with what I had said before. I'm clarifying I'm going out of my way to give you as many details as I possibly can. May I continue with my statement?
Mr. Shays.
It would be helpful for me, Mr. Bush, if you would reconcile the testimony on page 200 and 207. You say here, I asked the question, let me ask you this, how do you know Hunter Cushing? Mr. Bush, I know Hunter Cushing because I met him through a social event. That's on page 200. On page 207, Mr. Bush, I say, well, did you know Mr. Cushing beforehand? We said, yes, we did. We talked. We had one of the persons that Miss Dean sent us to see was Mr. Cushing. I'm getting a little confused whether you knew Mr. Cushing first or whether you knew Deborah Dean first, and who put you in touch with who.
Well, if you'd really bear with me, that is explained in here. Every clarification is in this. Please just give me a chance to go through my testimony.
Well, but it's more helpful to the committee since there are large numbers of facts that we pin them down as we go along. When did you meet Mr. Cushing?
I met Mr. Cushing, I don't remember exactly when I met Mr. Cushing.
Yeah, approximately.
Probably towards the end of 1985, or I'm sorry, towards the middle of 1985, early 1985, somewhere in there. I don't know.
Sometime.
But I understand your concern, all right? If I called Miss Dean and asked her about a particular project, she may have said, I don't deal with that, Hunter does. Talk to Mr. Cushing, all right? That's why I said she referred me to Mr. Cushing on a particular project.
I'm very willing to have you finish your statement. I'll have a number of questions in regards to this. I just want you to keep those questions in mind because they're very key.
Please go ahead.
I believe I had left off here where I said I then consulted a copy of the Federal Executive Directory to see who Ms. Dean was. Her name appeared just under the Secretary of HUD as his executive assistant. I called Ms. Dean to tell her we had a project we would like to promote, the Las Aminas project in Bayamon, Puerto Rico. Ms. Dean indicated she would see us. We went to her office to talk with her about the project. No one at Bush & Company understood at that time that Ms. Dean might have the power to approve this project. We just knew that she was a top aide to the Secretary of HUD and that she could help to make sure that our project did not get lost in the shuffle. Ms. Dean told us that she would take a look at our proposal and see if it was fundable. Subsequent to the meeting, I probably talked to her by phone about the project on a couple of occasions. Subsequently, we were informed it was fundable. However, as I said before, this project has never closed. No federal funds have been used in this project, and our former client has sold his options on the project to another developer. I did, over time, develop a social relationship with Ms. Dean and had lunch or dinner with her on several occasions. By way of additional clarification, to the best of my knowledge, and about another project near Dallas, Texas called St. Augustine. However, my colleague spoke to Mr. Cushing about several projects on a regular basis. Finally, one of the members of the committee had asked if our company obtained an opinion of counsel as to certain procedures. In that regard, our company had previously obtained an opinion of counsel as to the legality of certain aspects of our activities at HUD. The second subject I'd like to talk about this morning is the technical assistance grant for the city of San Juan, Puerto Rico. In 1985, Bush & Company submitted a technical assistance proposal for the city of San Juan, Puerto Rico. The proposal was to review the development of Old San Juan and its waterfront. This project was a top priority of our client, the mayor of San Juan. Sometime in late 1985, as part of our activities, we at Bush & Company met with Du Bois Gilliam to assess if this was an appropriate type of project for HUD to consider. We were referred to Mr. Gilliam by Ms. Dean. Mr. Gilliam indicated that this was, indeed, the type of project for which funds could be allocated from the Secretary's discretionary fund. After the meeting, my partner prepared a concept paper for Mr. Gilliam to review. He told us he would give our proposal to his staff and they would look it over. Over the next 2 years, my colleagues at Bush & Company negotiated with the HUD technical staff and produced 6 rewritten drafts in order to satisfy their concerns, specify the tasks, assign the cost and personnel to each activity, and to meet the goals of the city of San Juan. The technical assistance proposal was designed to help the city of San Juan maximize its community development block grant funds, which are provided to municipalities on a fair share basis. Specifically, it was intended to provide funds for a series of seminars and workshops to include banking and finance officials from around the island, city managers, mayors, developers, and other consultants. Over 1,000 people participated in these workshops and seminars. In addition, we developed an economic profile of the city and a computer software package that provided a housing and commercial property inventory for Old San Juan, which included all available spaces, lots, and buildings. We also did a study of the waterfront to ascertain its development potential.
Could I ask you whom you refer to when you keep using the term "we"? Was it your firm or was it the firm which actually did the job?
It's in the testimony and it's coming up right soon. Because I explain this.
Well, could you respond to my question?
We used many outside consultants, just as a developer does or a builder does when he builds a house. The man who builds the house hires an electrician and a plumber. He doesn't build a house himself. He gets the expertise he needs to make the project work. But it's probably he who had the idea to put it together. And he had the client who wanted the idea put together. May I continue? We also did a study of the waterfront to ascertain its development potential. All of this enabled the city of San Juan and interested parties to accurately assess available real estate inventory and other factors in order to make informed investment decisions. This data was used as marketing tools for the city to attract new investment and development as well as tourism. Bush & Company was the contractor for this project. Most of the actual on-site work done in Puerto Rico, however, was subcontracted to the Washington Group, Inc. The two principals in the Washington Group, Inc. were former employees of the mayor of San Juan when he served in the United States Congress as the resident commissioner. They were from Puerto Rico and spoke Spanish and had a technical staff in the field. They knew San Juan, the mayor, his staff, and the problems involved in San Juan. Other subcontractors were also used on this technical assistance grant, including accountants and attorneys. Of the $268,000 allocated for this project, approximately $203,000 went to outside contractors, and approximately $15,000 was never spent and not billed to HUD. Bush and Company received $50,000, which primarily was used to compensate the three individuals at Bush and Company who worked on this project and to cover overhead. Third, in an effort to make sure my testimony is completely accurate, I sent a letter to you, Chairman Lantos, on June 9th, 1989, regarding the HUD projects handled by Bush and Company. In that letter, I made reference to a land sale project, which in actuality was a land transfer, and the correct name of it is San Patricio, not Manatee. Additionally, I listed 8 projects which Bush and Company worked on involving HUD. Since that letter, my former colleagues advised me that there were other HUD-related projects which we worked on. There was a UDAG project in the state of Massachusetts called Chestnut Hill, for which a colleague and I were paid $3,000, approximately $3,000. Further, Bush and Company was involved in an FHA loan guarantee program request in Dallas, Texas, called St. Augustine. This request was denied and no fees were received for that project. There was also an application for a transfer of public assets regarding assets in Manatee, Puerto Rico, in which Bush and Company represented the developer in DECO. A fee of $40,000 was paid by the developer to Bush and Company. Also, we did a Section 202 elderly housing project for Arecibo, Puerto Rico, for which $30,000 in fees were received. Furthermore, there was a UDAG project for Dr. Pila Hospital, Puerto Rico, for which Bush and Company received $5,000, and in addition, myself and a colleague received $2,500 each. Finally, I have learned from my former colleagues that part of Bush and Company fees were paid to the same law firm in Puerto Rico referenced in my letter to Chairman Lantos on 2 additional projects. A fee of $3,500 was paid in conjunction with the Manatee, Puerto Rico UDAG, and a fee of $1,000 was paid in conjunction with the Temple, Texas rehab project. As to the Temple, Texas project, a retainer fee of $5,000 was paid to Bush and Company, and my letter should be modified to reflect that fee. One concluding comment, if the subcommittee would please bear with me. I've spent the better part of the last 3 weeks trying to bring myself up to speed on all of our HUD projects, their names, what we did on each one, who was involved, and how much we were paid. Because there has been no Bush and Company since November of last year, it has been particularly difficult to pull all this together. It has also been difficult because in most cases, I was personally involved only in the periphery of these projects. During most of this time, from March 1986 through November of last year, I was involved in fundraising. At times, I was working out of 3 offices simultaneously, answering as many as 100 phone calls a day for much of that period, and meeting with virtually dozens of people each week and doing extensive amounts of traveling. I have discovered over the last 3 weeks how truly difficult it is to resurrect events, places, people, and meetings. I hope that my statement today helps to allay your skepticism about my previous testimony. I have been as forthcoming as I can be, and I've relied heavily on the collective memory of my former colleagues at Bush and Company to do the best I can to bring you the facts as I know them. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bush. Could we begin by your describing for us how your relationship with Ms. Dean developed from that first meeting in early 1985, I believe, to September 86, when your wife, Katie, sent Ms. Dean, Dear Debbie, note thanking her for dinner, expressing regret that you would not be meeting with her on a trip to Europe that you and your wife were to make. So can you give us a...
Well, I'd like to clarify the trip. I was going to the Soviet Union on a delegation. Ms. Dean was also going on the delegation. She did not, as it turned out, she did not go. My wife, on the way back from the Soviet Union, we were stopping in Paris. The entire delegation was stopping in Paris for 2 days of debriefing. My wife was going to meet me there. The thank you note that my wife wrote was to thank Ms. Dean for taking us to dinner one night.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman? Was this delegation to the Soviet Union the HUD trip?
No. This delegation is an organization called the American Center for International Leadership. It is a nonprofit organization. We do the only exchange program in the United States with Hungary.
No, the only question I asked you if
right.
it was the HUD trip. Thank you, Mr.
No,
Chairman.
it was
Sorry to
not the HUD
interrupt.
trip.
During the time that you and your wife were socializing with Ms. Dean, did you have projects or applications of any kind pending before HUD?
Yes.
How many?
I don't know how many. I mean, we had there are 13 projects listed here. So
some of those were pending.
Some of those would have been pending during that time.
At our May 25 hearing, you were asked by Congressman Shays how many times you had conversations with Ms. Dean, either in person or by telephone, during the time she was at HUD. You responded a few, 4, 5. Was that a truthful response?
At the time I gave the statement, Congressman, to the best of my memory at that time, yes, it was truthful. I was telling the truth at that time as I knew it. Now, it's 4 years later. A lot of things have gone on. As I said, I've worked out of 3 offices at the same time. I did the best I could. I came here today and told you I had not had the benefit of counsel. I had not had the benefit of talking to my former colleagues. Maybe you have a better memory. I don't have a very good memory. I needed to talk to people and have them refresh my memory, and I have done that to the very best of my ability to satisfy the committee.
At our May 25 hearing, Mr. Bush, you were specifically asked about your involvement and fees received for any HUD-related projects. Is that correct?
Yes.
You discussed 3 moderate rehabilitation projects and several UDAC projects. Is that correct?
Yes.
Why did you fail to mention the $253,000 technical assistance grant for the city of San Juan, Puerto Rico that your firm received from HUD?
You started off that morning reading an article from, I believe, the Wall Street Journal that mentioned that particular project in the article. I assumed when you said, were there others, you were referring to others that were not public at that point. I was not trying to deceive you. I've gone overboard. I've given you more information here than you've asked for.
Could I ask your explanation of the following chain of events? Your firm's technical assistance grant application was repeatedly rejected by HUD career staff. As a matter of fact, according to your testimony, it was rejected 6 times. You had to submit 6 redrafts. But in the final analysis, technical staff apparently was overruled by senior HUD officials. Can you describe how this all came about?
Well, Congressman, if I had submitted, if my company had submitted the first draft and that was accepted as it is, I would have great skepticism. But when you're working with the staff, and I believe that Barbara Dorff was the career person that my colleagues were working with, I did not work on this project. 6 times over 2 years. You know, you don't just say to somebody, build a house. Here are the plans. Do you like it that way? It takes over and over and over. We were working and doing our very best to get it the way, to hone it down, to bring the costs down, to assign tasks. Concepts change during these drafts. I mean, if I was looking at this from the point of view you are, in a negative way, I would say, you mean you got this on the first draft? This is not like we just walked in there and threw it on the table and said, give us the money. 2 years went by and 6 rewrites, working almost exclusively with the technical staff. And I do not know that it was objected to. If it was objected to, I don't know that to be the case. You said apparently it was. I don't know that.
Well, let me read to you and we will be happy to make available to you the entire document. I'm just going to read the conclusion.
This is the conclusion from?
Of the Office of Program and Policy Development, which is the entity that makes the recommendations. The Office of Program and Policy Development has reviewed the proposal and the reviewer's comments and concurs in the opinion of those recommending against funding. The primary reasons for this recommendation are the lack of a clear indication of significant benefit to accrue to San Juan through improved administration of its CDBG program, the lack of CDBG experience of the principals, lack of specific details on the objectives of the proposal, and the lack of adequate cost justification for the project.
What is the date of that, sir?
The date of that is March 19, 1986. We'll be most happy to make it available to you now if you'd like to look at it.
This project was not approved until September of the next year.
That is right. That is right.
So that was the initial reaction to the first draft, as I understand it. And we went about trying to allay the concerns that they had. Of course they had concerns. And the mayor of San Juan, as we talked to him, as my colleagues talked to him regularly about this, the concept about this, the focal point changed a bit. Maybe it wasn't all going to be the development of the waterfront. More it's going to be developing the economic profile. I think you should take a look at the study. And it's about that thick, all the proposals and all the rewrites, and I think you'll find a fairly good product. And I think you should ask the mayor, did this serve the city well? Ask Mayor Carrata. He was very, very adamant about having this project and wrote letters, I believe, to the secretary indicating he wanted this project.
Well, if I were the mayor, I would ask the first question as to why a project which clearly requires intimate knowledge of the city, intimate knowledge of the community, obviously fluency in the language, is given to an entity which possesses none of the qualifications for getting the job done. As a matter of fact, I as a taxpayer would be asking the question, and I do want to ask that question. Of the $253,000 that the Department of Housing and Urban Development spent on this project, $203,000 was given to the company that had the qualifications and did in fact do the job. And $50,000, it seems, went to the middleman.
No, the other company...
That is my judgment on the basis of your testimony.
The Washington...
And on the basis of the records we have obtained from HUD, which show a repeated rejection of your proposal because it was deemed inadequate. 6 redrafts is a clear indication that every time this came in, it was just not good.
Every time it came in, it needed more work. And that's understandable. Somebody comes to you with a draft of a letter, you might change it 6 times before you send it out. You want to get it right. And I'm not saying we did it perfectly, but I think the product, the final product, is good. To best of my knowledge, I want to correct the record, $203,000 went to outside consultants. It did not all go to that one Washington group, who, by the way, had great expertise in this area.
Maybe they should have gotten the contract.
It wasn't their idea. It wasn't their idea. They did not write the proposal. We wrote the proposal. My colleagues wrote the proposal. And I suppose they could have done it too. They knew Mayor Carrata very well.
To change the topic somewhat, did you have anything to do with Mr. Cushing obtaining his position that he occupies at present?
I wrote a letter, actually a memo, not a letter, a memo, a form memo that was used at the transition. I wrote hundreds of the memos recommending that they look at this individual for a position. Not a specific position, just a position.
Will you submit for the subcommittee's files a copy of your letter of recommendation that
Those are not my property, sir. They are the property of the presidential transition team. And I don't know under what auspices they fall.
Can you summarize the nature of the recommendation you gave Mr. Cushing?
It was a memorandum, form memo that we used on as a regular basis. It had the name of the person, a place for comments. I said my comment, as I remember it, was known for some time, meaning I've known him for some time. He's not new. This was a memo that you attach to a resume. Rather than having to write a memo every time, you just...
well, I've written many letters of recommendation in my lifetime.
This is not a letter. This is a memo.
It's in a memo.
It's not even a memo. It's a form.
Just
it's a form
name, rank, and serial number.
It's a form that you fill in, and you fill in about 3 items. Worked on the campaign. I think I wrote no, hatched. That kind of thing. And I sent it down with literally hundreds of others.
The person who received this memo, did he obtain any clue as to what you thought of the individual?
It goes to a computer.
Did the computer get a clue as to what you thought of the individual?
I have no idea. As I said, there were hundreds of these, and I was just one of hundreds of people feeding information into a central point. I made no phone calls to anyone about Mr. Cushing. I introduced him to no one. I hope that answers your question.
Did he request you to support his application?
Yes, he wrote me a letter and asked me to recommend him, as hundreds or maybe even thousands of people have done.
And were all of your recommendations issued with equal enthusiasm, or?
Oh no, sir.
Some were stronger.
Some people got jobs and others didn't, as you might imagine. It wasn't 100% by any means, and I can tell you that probably many, many more did not receive jobs just because I wrote a recommendation for them, or sent a memo to the computer.
I want to give you a document from Deborah Gore, Dean, to Tony Benedy, Coordinator of Special Projects, Office of the Vice President. Want you to look at it, Ms. Bush. I'll give you a few moments to. The document, as you see, is dated June 10, 1987. It is from Deborah Gore, Dean, to Tony Benedy, Coordinator of Special Projects, Office of the Vice President. The subject is Bayamon, Puerto Rico. Is Bayamon, Puerto Rico the project that you were involved with?
Yes.
The letter says, and I'm just summarizing it, you're looking at it in its detail. Deborah Dean says, per your request regarding funds provided by the Department of Housing and Urban Development to assist the city of Bayamon, Puerto Rico, the following represents funds provided for FY 86-87. Then it lists them. One project for $149,000, $836,000, $936,000, $208,000, total of $2,129,000. It does discuss MUD rehab grants, but then I direct your attention to the last 2 paragraphs. And I'd like you to read those carefully and then comment on them. The last 2 paragraphs of Debbie Dean's memo to the coordinator of special projects, the Vice President's office, read as follows. There are currently no IG investigations, Inspector General investigations involving Bayamon, Puerto Rico. But please reference page 30 in the attached Office of Inspector General report to the Congress on the CDBG operations in the municipality of Bayamon. Region 2 has requested Bayamon to repay $1 million, and we are certain that this request will meet opposition from Bayamon. If the advance work is handled properly, this should not present a problem, but it is potentially dangerous. Now, could you explain what your understanding of this memo is?
I have no idea. I've never seen it. I know both Tony Bennedy and Deborah Gordine, but I have not a clue what this is about, what it refers to, why it was sent. No idea.
Well, you were involved with this project, were you not?
Which project?
The Bayamon request.
Well, it says the Bayamon request.
Well, let me ask you, perhaps in a more helpful way, did you have any dealings with Tony Bennedy? And by the way, I don't know whether Tony is a gentleman or a lady.
It's a man.
It's a man.
He's a man.
Did you have any dealing with Mr. Tony Bennedy concerning any of your HUD projects?
Never.
Never?
Never. To the best of my recollection, I mean, I'm very surprised to see Tony Bennedy's name on this. To the best of my recollection, I never have ever spoken to Tony Bennedy about anything to do with HUD. I mean, I'm not even sure, and I'm not sure anyone is, that this is even the same project that we were working on. Remember, that project was 85.
It is the same project.
It is the same project.
It is the same project. It's a 180-unit mod rehab project. You have no, your testimony is, Mr. Bush, that you have no idea why Debbie Dean raises these problems with respect to Bayamon and concludes her memo saying, if the advance work is handled properly, this should not present a problem, but it is potentially dangerous.
I have no clue, Congressman.
Congressman Lukens.
You know, our project, I want to remind you that this project was never funded.
Well, maybe it was deemed too dangerous. I mean, that's what Debbie Dean's memo indicates, doesn't it?
It was never.
I did not write this memo. It's Miss Dean who wrote this memo.
It was funded because the developer chose not to do the project because it was not going to be profitable from his point of view, and he sold the options to another developer who thought it could be profitable from his point of view.
Could I just ask a general question for which no technical knowledge and certainly no recollection is required? Give me your understanding. I know you didn't write this memo, but it was written by a person you knew to another person you also knew concerning a project with which you were involved with. Define for me the proper meaning of the term dangerous in this context.
I have no idea. How can you ask me to determine the meaning of a word I did not write to someone?
The word dangerous has many meanings. It has a physical meaning. It has a meaning that maybe it's on shifty physical grounds and it's a bad place to place a project. But it could mean politically dangerous, could it not?
It could mean anything, but I don't want to speculate on this because I don't know. And I think it's unfair, frankly, of you to ask me to interpret a memo that I never saw, did not write, and don't understand. It may not even be my client. It could be the other developer.
Well, let's assume it has nothing to do with you. You have been in the bureaucratic loop now for some years, have you not?
Yes.
You are able to read memoranda. You can make judgments about memoranda, terms used in memoranda, without having written them, without being involved with them. Do you really think it's unfair to ask for an interpretation of the term dangerous in this context?
In a hearing of this nature, I think it's very unfair.
Well, the chair respectfully disagrees with you. Mr. Lukens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me go to your relationship with Tony Benedy. You did not contact him in any way regarding the HUD dealings. How did you come to know him and know that he's a man? I mean,
Tony was an advance man for the vice president, and I think he goes back to the early days of the first campaign doing advance.
so you knew him in a political context, political campaign context.
Correct.
Can anyone have put together the projects that you put together? Now, what kind of expertise does it take to understand the system, to understand what's involved with the subcontractors, quote, quote, the specialist, and to make a bid, so to speak, on a project and yet guarantee some element of profit? What kind of organization does it take to do this kind of thing?
You know, I'm glad you mentioned that, Congressman Lukens, because the element of profit here is there was no profit in this. If I still had Bush and Company, we would never want to do another one of these projects. They are incredibly time-consuming.
All right, forgive me for a minute. Obviously, some of them did make some money. You continue dealing. So at what point have you come to this decision that HUD dealings were not profitable enough to stay in them, if you were still in business?
No,
A year ago, 2 years ago, or?
Well, there's no more company. So, I mean, it's...
Given the fact there's no more company.
I'm saying, no, I'm talking about technical assistance grants.
Okay, thank you.
Okay? Just technical assistance grants. They are very time-consuming. And I would not have ever recommended that we do another one.
Do you know if they're acknowledged to be the most difficult kind of grants
No.
to bid and to do?
I don't know that.
But they were difficult as far as you were concerned.
Well, they were time-consuming. I mean, I did not work on this project. I did not do the writing. My partners did the writing. My colleagues did the writing. And they had people helping them. I did not do this. So how difficult it was, I don't know if it was difficult, but it was very time-consuming.
I wish to ask, within the parameters of error, what kind of profits involved, for example, in project by project? I find the fees to be reasonable, but I'm not an expert in the housing field and the HUD grants field. I'm becoming more of an expert than I wish to be, but from this committee, I think we're all going to be experts. The Ponce, Puerto Rico MRP project, moderate rehab, $55,800. That's obviously just technical assistance, but what did that money go for, and what kind of profits involved in that minimal amount, given the size of the overall project?
That $55,800 was what was paid to Bush and Company.
All right, but for what? In other words,
for providing technical assistance to the developer. This is a day-to-day process. It's keeping him informed of the regulations. Remember, you're working in Puerto Rico. A lot of the people in Puerto Rico use consultants in Washington, not just for this, but for lots of things, because of the language difference, the travel time, and there's cultural differences. So they find it easier to hire individuals who live in Washington, more so probably than anyone else in the country.
Well, from my standpoint, so you know where I'm coming from, I guess the second time around has been better for you, because I find that your testimony to me is at least compelling, and the fees are, let me finish, the fees are reasonable given the size of the overall project, but I'm trying to get a handle, what do the fees represent? Did the $55,800 represent a gross profit to you? What had to come out of that? I'm trying to get a handle how you budget these things, how you try to build in a profit, and how much should be profitable.
Taken away from the $55,800 would be obviously travel costs to Puerto Rico, part of our overhead, paying staff. I mean, all that goes into it. I can't tell you what the profit on that particular project was. I don't know.
I'm coming to this, actually. In the HUD handbook, under this program, there's supposed to be indirect costs, but actually no increment this has to do with profit. No increment above cost may be paid to a recipient under a HUD discretionary grant or co-op agreement. I assume that these fell on this provision. So if there's basically not supposed to be a profit, and I'm not trying to trap you, I'm trying to understand how the system worked. Obviously, other people understood it very well. Your fees seem reasonable, but I don't have anything against which to compare them. If the $56,000, more or less, went to you, do you think 50% of it was profit, 20% profit? What was your goal? What amount of that did you think was fair profit to you? I'm trying to get a handle on that.
I don't think we ever had that discussion. Now that you've mentioned our profit, let me, by the way, it's the developer is the person who paid us.
Mr. Bush, I appreciate that remark, but unfortunately, other witnesses have gotten in great trouble with that because the taxpayers basically pay it. We can argue this all day, but we're here today because taxpayers' dollars, no matter who picks it up and who funnels it to someone else, we think have been abused and wasted. And I'm not accusing you of that. I think your testimony has been very forthright up to now. What I'm trying to do is to understand, from, if not for other members of the committee, certainly for me and for my taxpayers, basically, do you try to build in a 30% profit, a 20% profit? I'm coming back to this. The going price on the street, quote, quote, from some witnesses was $1,000, $2,000 a unit. I'm trying to understand in a tech assistance program, since there are no units involved, basically, how you build in a profit.
You're talking now about the technical assistance grant.
Well, I don't know what Ponce was a mod rehab. So 55.8 wouldn't cover very many units. How did you make an estimate on what was fair profit returned to Bush and Company? I'm trying to get a handle on that process.
I honestly can't remember that without talking to my colleagues. And you know, we were a very small firm. The idea of how much profit we made, I mean, that's not a discussion we had, like, oh yeah, we're going to get 30% profit out of this and 10% of the profit out of that. We never had that kind of discussion.
Mr. Bush, I accept that, and I understand it, and I probably can be led to absolutely believe it. But you can't tell me convincingly today that you say, well, we're going to do 55.8 on that project. And
are you asking me how we arrived at our price?
Let me finish my question. I'm not trying to trap you. I'm just trying to understand it. 55.8, and we may lose money on it. There has to be something built in that would, otherwise you wouldn't go to Puerto Rico to lose money. So I'm not trying to trap you into something specific today, but generally, do you go with a sliding scale? Is there a 10% absolute profit that you throw on top, which to me is very minimal, or 20%? Because we've had people make fortunes for very little work. Your firm, at least, has done a lot of work. You basically, or apparently, have been able to, no, you have brought material to us that apparently would convince most people that your firm is a legitimate firm involved in the whole scope of activity that tries to offer professional assistance to cities that need it. And you're taking advantage of a program. Our problem is here, that many people have abused these programs. So we're trying to understand at what point do the legitimate service providers depart, and can we correct that? Now, of all these, 160,000 for Biomon, you must have something that said, yeah, we're going to try and make 15% and build in a 5% margin. How do you approach putting a price tag on these projects?
On the mod rehab projects.
Pick a project you like, one that serves your purpose. I just want to understand it.
Well, the project I like is the technical assistance grant.
Okay. That's San Juan, $253,000, of which $203,000 was paid to outside subcontractors.
Correct.
Then in that case, since I can obviously subtract, $50,000 basically came back to you as gross profit.
Well, yes.
Okay.
It truly was not profit because it went to pay.
It's gross profit, not net.
Gross profit, that's correct.
Now, I'm not trying to trick you. I'm really trying to go through this thing step by step.
That's
We've
correct.
had so many big figures that it's out of my league. But $50,000 I can handle. Now, out of the $50,000, basically, that's a gross profit of 20%, which some would think, hey, that's reasonable. But you had to subtract what items from that $50,000? Transportation to and from Puerto Rico, how many trips would you think that would be? 3, 4, 2, 1?
I don't know because I didn't go.
But at least one trip was made. And knowing that it could be expensive, I understand that. What other kind of expenses would be deducted from the gross to come up with a net?
The hourly salaries, in other words, the people who are working on this project billed hourly. And so, and that is the great bulk of that $50,000 was the hourly time working on this project. That's towards that $50,000. Other things would be telephones, correspondence, Xeroxing, basic overhead, travel,
So
taxis. I mean,
So you would basically say, given a great deal of latitude for error until you check the figures, that probably half of that was eaten up in expenses.
well, I would say out of the, this is a guesstimate without looking at them, I would say out of the $50,000, 40,000 at least went to pay those hourly time salaries, and the rest were expenses. I have all these. I would be glad to provide them to the subcommittee.
Only if the chairman requests. I'm just trying to walk through the system. I appreciate it. We've come to a figure at least that I can handle and in my mind with which I am comfortable. Let me go a little bit further. On the minimal projects, such as 12,500 and 17,000, if one trip down there, what, $2,500 if you stay any time at all and do anything, at 12,500, there's very little money left for anything. And I would like in my mind to comprehend on the San Patricio, you had 12,000 on a land transfer and 17,000 for UDAG. Now, those would be simpler, right? Would not require nearly as much time.
That's correct.
What does that kind of quote minimal fee compared to other fees accomplish? Is it simply paperwork here or paperwork down there? Could an associate do it totally from Washington, D.C., or would you have to take a trip to Puerto Rico to do that?
It could be both. It usually entails work here. If it entailed work there, they probably wouldn't want somebody physically located in Washington. But on some of these projects, the work was done in both places. Some of it was done here.
All right. Now, I'll get off this. I'm relatively satisfied with what I've learned, and I appreciate what I take to be extremely honest answers in this regard. Are you familiar with any other technical assistant projects within HUD?
No.
All right. If I would ask you a question about how much, say, a technical assistance project for New York City or a larger major city would cost, you'd have no idea.
I have no idea.
But as far as you're concerned, you would not, if you were in Bush and Company, still operating today, you would definitely not bid for another technical assistance project.
Correct.
And the reason is that you really don't make a lot of money off of it.
You don't make any money off of it, and it ties up staff for inordinate amounts of time, and that's all you can do.
Now let me come to the really
Part of it is because of the inordinate amount of record keeping that you must, when you're dealing with federal dollars, you must furnish.
So a lot of overhead and hourly wages.
Yes.
I think the point and thrust of the hearings, from where I sit, is that people really abuse the program in two ways. First, outright corruption, which we're not dealing with, of course, today in these hearings and this aspect. And the other is that which we are dealing with, and that would be the abuse of the program, especially in the area of high-paid consultants for very little work, or for, if you like, a couple of telephone calls. In this case, I am almost convinced at least you attempted to do everything you thought you were supposed to be doing and really didn't make that much profit as far as I can see, but I don't know what, per my questions, how much is deducted from the fees you receive. In this regard, do you feel that at any point of this process of obtaining the grant and fulfilling the requirements of the grant that you used personally, that you exerted any political influence? And, I'm assuming that you have a great deal of political influence, probably more than we have at this table individually, but do you feel that you ever used any?
Absolutely not. I never used what is called political influence.
Did you hire anybody else for that purpose?
No.
So in your opinion, your testimony today and in your mind, is that you were offering a legitimate service, trying to perform within the elements of the law, and the leads we have, which are numerous in terms of social acquaintances and campaign acquaintances, professional acquaintances, that you did not use any of those friends or contacts in an effort to use straight political influence to buy into these contracts or to fulfill the contract requirements?
That's correct.
I guess that's it.
Well, I'm truly puzzled by this last response, so I need to pursue it a bit before I call on my next colleague. Is it your testimony, Mr. Bush, that it was your expertise in the field of housing that succeeded, that made you successful in obtaining these projects?
As I stated before, Mr. Chairman, my former colleagues had lived in Puerto Rico for 3 years. They were not unfamiliar with the federal programs and problems in the Commonwealth. One of those individuals knew and understood many of the housing programs, not all of them and not in wonderful detail, but enough to know how to work on these projects. I personally, as I've said to you before, did not have that expertise. These clients came to us because of my former partner's association with Puerto Rico. He had been the chief of staff to the former governor. He knew many of the players there in Puerto Rico. And I have to say that over the 4 years, we did, in our office, develop expertise in many of these housing projects. You have to start somewhere. And we did. We started and we learned. People in my office learned. It was a learning process that went on for 4 years.
The document that I was reading from earlier contains the various evaluators' judgment of the project, and at the professional level of HUD, they're recommending against funding your project, Mr. Bush. The funding comes out of the discretionary budget of the Secretary, and overruling the objections of the professional staff, let me repeat this, overruling the objections of the professional staff which evaluated your project at its various drafts and redrafts. The political people approved your project. You have any comment on that?
I did not know, and I still don't, the internal system that HUD was using for the selection process of these projects. I know that my colleagues spent hours and hours and hours working with people at the technical level of HUD. Now, I would very much like to see the rejection, if that's what you're calling it, of the final draft by the staff, and I'd like to know how that process happened. What date are you working on? What date is that particular document?
March 19, 1986.
As I said again, this project was not approved until September of '87.
My understanding is that it was conditionally approved by Mr. Pierce in March of '86.
Conditional approval. There's no dollar given for conditional approval.
Well,
not one penny.
Why would the Secretary give conditional approval to a project that the professional staff rejects?
I have no idea.
Well, guess.
I don't know. I was not involved in the internal processes of HUD. I'm not going to guess. I'm here to answer questions to the best of my knowledge. There's no reason I should be guessing at anything.
Well, let me give you some of the reasons why the professional staff is rejecting your project. Uncertainty about the degree of support or interest in the technical assistance effort by the City of San Juan. Lack of measurable products to be developed or delivered through the technical assistance effort. Lack of methodology for building a permanent framework for the city to carry on an improved economic development program in the future. The possibility that the proposal may be duplicative of other technical assistance efforts which have been aiding the City of San Juan. The need for a much more specific budget so that actual beneficiaries may be identified. Concern about the high cost of the project and the possibility that the administrative costs may be overestimated. Concerns that the project database to be developed may not be really relevant and transferable to San Juan. Lack of specificity in the proposal. The proposal was reviewed by several people whose job it is professionally to review these projects at HUD. And they didn't like your project. They thought it was a lousy project. They thought it was an overly expensive project. They thought that the administrative costs were too high. And when all of this is put together, the conclusion, the one-paragraph conclusion is the office has reviewed the proposal and the reviewer's comments and concurs in the opinion of those recommending against funding. Nothing could be more clear. The primary reasons for this recommendation are the lack of a clear indication of significant benefit to accrue to San Juan, etc. Lack of experience of the principals. I mean, they could not be more specific. You were one of the principals. And the reviewers say, Mr. Bush, you lacked experience. Lack of specific details, lack of adequate cost justification. As a matter of fact, as I was reading it a few days ago, and I can find that reference for you, initially you submitted, I think, a project for $380,000 on this. And then you cut it back to $250,000, which addresses the concerns of my colleague from Ohio. Apparently you built in a huge cushion, and when that didn't fly, you cut that tremendous cushion back to a manageable cushion. I don't want to belabor this, but I think it's self-evident that you had no qualifications to undertake this project, that the professional HUD staff recommended against it, but since it was part of the discretionary budget of the Secretary, through some mysterious process, whoever controlled that discretionary budget decided that they're going to overrule the professional staff, their professional recommendations against letting you have it, and gave it to you. Those are the facts. Congressman.
I disagree with you.
Well, of course you do. Of course you do.
And have you taken an opportunity to look at the product?
Well, Mr. Bush, I am studying very conscientiously the paper trail of this project. The paper trail of this project says that the people who are professionally qualified to review projects of this kind concluded that this is no good and no public funds should be allocated to it.
I hardly suggest you talk to Barbara Dorff, who I understand was the person at the technical level who was assigned to work on this project. And she is the person who worked on this project with my colleagues.
Several people worked on this project, and the consensus recommendation was to deny you funding for it.
The gentleman yield?
Be happy to yield.
Well, it seems to me from what the gentleman has said, what happened is this. They applied. The technical staff said it wasn't worth it. That was in '86. Political influence was then brought to bear, so the Secretary gave it a, quote, conditional approval, unquote, which meant he said to the technical people, I know you don't like it, but I got to do it, so you got to do it. And yes, somebody, and I think the phraseology we just used, someone was then assigned to the project. Well, ordinarily, without a lot of political influence, if you make a proposal and it is rejected, you don't get someone assigned by the Secretary to put it into shape. And the fact that this was rejected and then got a conditional approval, and it took a year and a half for them apparently to work it out to the point where they could get it, I think confirms what the point of this is, that political influence was able to overturn that decision. And the very fact that the Secretary assigned someone from the technical staff to work on it, frankly, my guess is that we not only had a project here that shouldn't have been approved without the influence, but that people who could have been working on other things were in fact diverted from that to help get this thing into shape so it could come up to the standards that had to be met to justify that conditional approval.
Congressman Weiss.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bush, I did not attend the first hearing, and so I may have missed it in going through the transcript. Would you tell us what your position was with the Vice President, how long you held it?
When I worked in his office?
Yes.
I was Deputy Chief of Staff for 2 years.
From what years to what years?
From January of '82 to December of '83.
And when did you form Bush and Company?
Bush and Company was formed in April of '85.
And between the end of 83 and 85, you were engaged in campaign activities. Is that the idea?
Between?
Between the time that you left in 83.
No. I worked for a construction company, a private construction company.
Okay. And when you formed Bush and Company, how many partners did you have?
One partner, only, I mean, in the true sense of the word, one partner, and another colleague at the outset.
And who were they?
Michael Govan and Jim Nunes. Michael Govan was my partner.
And what were their backgrounds?
Well, Mr. Govan was from Michigan.
What jobs did they hold?
He had been for 3 years the chief of staff to the former governor of Puerto Rico. And before that, he worked as an assistant to the vice president in correspondence. I should also tell you, you asked me what I did in the interim that year.
Well, never mind. I was interested really in the Bush and Company creation. Tell me about the second gentleman was Mr. Noonan?
Nunes.
Nunes.
N-U-N-E-S.
And what did he do?
He was a consultant with the Hoving Group.
With the which group?
The Hoving Group, H-O-V-I-N-G.
Yes, and what did they do?
I don't know. I didn't know the Hoving Group.
When you took him on as a colleague, associate, was he a partner? He was not.
He was not a partner.
Okay.
Mr. Govan and Mr. Nunes had known each other prior to my knowing either of them.
But on what basis did Mr. Nunes come into your company?
At the suggestion of Mr. Govan. They had known each other prior to my knowing either of them.
And when you formed the company with Mr. Govan, what was the basis of his coming into the firm?
He was living in Puerto Rico.
Yes.
And he wanted to come back to Washington. He thought he had some contacts in Puerto Rico that he had developed. He knew the governor. People were coming to him all the time with this problem or that problem. I was in Washington. We got together.
And what was the intent? What was your intention when you formed Bush and Company? What was the company going to do?
We were going to be, well, as many companies start out, you know, we were going to be a public relations firm. We didn't have a great scenario of what we were going to do. I mean, we were 3 people.
Well, I know. You were 3 people, 2 of whom had very heavy governmental responsibilities, 2 partners with the vice president, 1 with the governor of Puerto Rico, and you were going to go into public relations.
Right.
What did you intend to do in public relations? Were you going to publicize books? Were you going to publicize hotels? What were you going to do?
I guess we hoped to be doing basic Washington representation, which included press relations, lobbying. I mean, there was no grand design to this.
Well, when did your first HUD-related piece of business come along?
My first HUD-related piece of business came along as a referral from Mr. Govan when he was living in Puerto Rico sometime in '84.
Before the partnership or after?
Before the partnership.
Before the partnership.
Correct.
Okay. And so that you, in fact, formed the relationship with Mr. Govan, that is, the company with Mr. Govan, because you already had an interest in HUD-related business. Isn't that correct?
That's when I cut Mr. Miller
right.
off. This project, well, an interest. We had done one project, and I believe we were paid $5,000 for it at that time.
But this was before you formed the firm, right?
Correct.
And on the basis of the HUD-related involvement, you decided that you and Mr. Govan could go into business to do representational work with HUD. Is that correct?
No, it was never. It's not something that we saw as a primary place to work. The project came to him. I mean, we never solicited anybody on a HUD project. We never went out and said, we want to work on a project for you. They all came to us. This one came to us. The very first one. It's never, as I have testified, I had no HUD experience.
Yeah. Okay, and this piece of business, as you say, occurred before the company was formed, sometime in mid-1984.
Towards the end of '84.
Okay, and the firm itself was formed in the early part of '85.
Right.
Okay, now, what was the, when you formed that company, Mr. Lantos had asked you at the very beginning of the hearings on May 25th about the promotional material
Yes.
that was sent out. And apparently this is material that was forwarded, among other places, to HUD as well.
I know what you're referring to.
Let me ask you the question.
Yes.
Okay? It says at the bottom of page 1, as Deputy Chief of Staff to the Vice President, he, referring to you, to Mr. Bush, he has been able to develop an extensive network throughout the White House and most federal agencies, as well as with congressional leaders in both the Senate and the House of Representatives. Thus, Bush and Company's unique assets are its familiarity with the governmental process, access to government officials, knowledge of the issues, and the ability to combine these resources to successfully negotiate on behalf of a client. Tell me what that was intended to convey to people.
Well, as I said, we checked with many, we collected actually, the brochures and pamphlets of other Washington public relations firms. And as I said, we were 3 people. We wanted to give ourselves a presence, if you will. And we adopted the language that many of them use. So I suppose the answer is it was to give a presence. It was directed, the purpose was to give a presence and to tell about ourselves.
Well, you were in fact aware, as you were sending this out, that you were promoting access to government officials and your extensive network throughout the White House and most federal agencies. Isn't that correct?
It said so.
Okay, so that in fact you were offering to use your experience, knowledge, and influence on behalf of your clients. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely, in an appropriate way, certainly.
Yes, okay.
That's lobbying, sir.
Pardon?
That is lobbying. That's what a lobbyist does.
Yes, indeed. Now, how soon after the company was formed in '85 did you get your first piece of HUD-related business?
As I said, the first project that came to us was not under Bush and Company.
Yes, I know, and I'm asking you now about the second piece of business.
The first Bush and Company project was the Las Aminas project.
And when did that occur?
Sometime, I believe, in early '85.
Well, tell me, was it January, February, March, April?
I don't know. I don't know exactly when it was.
Within how many weeks or days of the formation of Bush and Company did it come to you?
I don't know.
Could you find out for the record and submit it to us?
Certainly. I'll do my best.
Well, you do have records of the company, do you not?
Yes.
Okay, and how long after that did your second piece of business with HUD in relation to Bush and Company come along?
Well, there was another project that came to us before Bush and Company. These two small projects. This Dr. Pila Hospital project and the other the one in Chestnut Hill, Massachusetts.
Those before Bush and Company?
That was before Bush and Company.
I know. I'm asking you about after Bush and Company.
I don't know the next project in order.
Would you submit, if the chair would permit, to the chair, to the subcommittee, a chronology of when you received your various items of HUD-related business with Bush and Company?
All right.
Okay. Now, you indicated in the course of today's testimony in correcting some of the testimony from May 25th, that indeed you had consulted, or Bush and Company had consulted counsel to determine the lawfulness of the activities of the company. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, whom did you consult, when did you consult them, and why did you consult them?
The lawyer, you want the name of the lawyer?
Yep.
John Neild of Howry and Simon.
Yes, when?
September 26, 1988.
September 26, 88.
Oh, no.
And
I'm sorry. We consulted them earlier on that, but the memo they sent to us was September 26, 1988.
and why?
Refreshing. They were reviewing some other papers for us, and saw this fee and said, this is a fairly large fee. Are you sure you're doing things correctly? We said, to the best of our knowledge, we are. And they said, well, with your permission, we want to take a look at this, and they did. And what they told us was that we were doing things correctly. That we were doing things correctly.
Now, when did you
legally?
When did your firm go out of business?
November. Well, I dissolved the company on November 22nd
of 1988. 1988. And so I thought you had said in your earlier testimony that during 1988 you were doing all kinds of things. The business was still functioning during the...
Yes, sir. I was not running the business, but the business was functioning. I was not even there in that office most of the time. I was physically located in 2 other offices.
But you had never consulted any lawyers as to the appropriateness of your representational work before various of the federal agencies, including HUD?
Correct.
Now, tell me what other federal agencies besides HUD you represented clients before.
Before, I don't know them all. I would, because I wasn't working on these projects. I'd be happy to furnish that at a later date. Again, I got myself last time guessing at things, and I don't want to guess this time. I
don't want you to guess either. But you've come back to us now.
Right.
After a month's separation from your first testimony, you've had a chance to review in your own mind what your business activities were. You've had occasion to retain counsel, and you're now before us. So I'm not asking you to guess. I assume that you've had a chance to review some of this material now, and I don't think that it's such a radical question to ask you as to what other agencies of the federal government you represented clients before than HUD.
I don't think it's either. I just want to make sure that when I give you the statement, it's accurate. And
were there other agencies besides HUD that you represented clients before?
I'm sure there were.
And can you tell us the extent of income you received in between 1985 and 1988 from representational work before other agencies of the federal government?
Not off the top of my head. I have no idea.
Do you have any idea as to whether it exceeds the tens of thousands?
Are you talking about the firm or me individually?
I'm talking about the firm.
The firm. It would. I have no idea. Again,
do you know whether it exceeds the hundreds of thousands?
It could.
Does it exceed the millions?
No.
So it's the high hundreds?
I don't know, and I don't want to guess, but I will be glad to furnish that information.
Okay. Just one other area of clarification. In going through the transcript, I think that Mr. Shays will probably go into this in great detail, but you indicated that the first time that you met Mr. Cushing was because Ms. Dean had suggested that he was the person to see. Now you've come and testified that a colleague of yours, one of your colleagues in the firm, refreshed your recollection and told you that, in fact, a colleague had met Mr. Cushing, and he suggested seeing Ms. Dean. Now, had you, in fact, met Mr. Cushing before you met Ms. Dean?
Not to my knowledge. I don't ever remember meeting Mr. Cushing before I met Ms. Dean. Me personally.
Okay. Did you, in fact, have occasion to meet Mr. Cushing after Ms. Dean referred you to see him?
Of course.
Okay. And did you, in the course of that conversation, say to him, Ms. Dean referred me to you?
Yes.
And did he have occasion to remind you that, in fact, he had met one of your partners who had asked about a matter that they were interested in before HUD?
I don't ever remember that conversation. If I had remembered that conversation, I would have certainly said so when asked about how we met Ms. Dean in the first place. I might have remembered. He's never mentioned that.
Okay. Now, in my final question, Mr. Chairman, in the course of your testimony on May 25th, you went into great detail about the amount of work and time that you had put into these HUD-related projects. And so I'm specifically concerned in asking you about the Bayamon, Puerto Rico project. On the letter that you sent to Mr. Lantos, you indicate that that's $160,000. It's what the firm received. Is that correct?
Correct.
And what were the number of units for that?
180.
180. And
now, you know, Mr.
Please,
Congressman, this particular project never came to fruition. It never closed.
Yes.
To this day, it is not closed.
Right.
Okay, and no federal money has gone to this project.
We've heard that litany before, as Mr. Lukens has indicated. On what basis was the $160,000 figure arrived at?
I believe it was probably based upon a fee per unit.
Right. So that the amount of work that went into it was really not relevant. It was a matter of number of units and the number of dollars per unit. Isn't that correct?
I guess that's really up to the developer to determine whether he's getting his value for what he's paying.
But the determination of that fee was up front. That was made before you knew how much work was going to go into it. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Congressman Kyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a couple of questions relating to the company. First of all, did you hire additional employees as time went on, people that would have experience in the different areas in which you had clients?
We hired additional employees. They were not specifically HUD experts, but yes, we did.
Did you, when you had HUD contracts, did you rely on these employees and the experience that they learned about projects, or did you hire consultants who had HUD experience, or both?
To my knowledge, the only consultants we hired or subcontracted anything to were on the technical assistance grant. Everything else we did ourselves.
So on the rehabilitation projects, you hired employees who acquired experience, or did some of them have pre-experience in HUD?
Well, we didn't hire anybody for a project specific. In other words, we didn't hire someone and say, all right, you are going to work on that mod rehab. Didn't work that way. I mean, we were so small, people were working on lots of different things.
About how many employees did the company have at the highest level of employment?
I believe 6.
So you just hired people that you thought would do good work, and when a HUD project came in, they got up to speed on what was required there.
Correct. And I have to clarify employees in the true sense of the word, as opposed to, for example, Mr. Nunes technically was never an employee of Bush & Company. He was not on our payroll. He did not receive health benefits, etc. But he was part and parcel of Bush & Company from the day it began. And that was his choice, the way he preferred to work.
So you had a contractual relationship, but you wouldn't really characterize it as an employee.
It was really not even there was no contract. It was just an understanding.
Did he then receive fees from you on a per project basis on which he worked?
Yes.
As a general order of magnitude estimate, about what percentage of the overall work during the entire time that your company was in operation was the gross income of the HUD-related work that you did?
Chairman asked me that last time. I have not found out the answer to that, but I would be glad to supply that. Again, I don't want to guess, and I guessed last time, and I don't know if my guess was right.
Well, was it relatively small or?
I don't know. I really don't want to guess, Congressman Kyle.
On the City of San Juan matter, did that client come to your firm asking for assistance with the project?
Every client, every project at HUD that we worked on came to us.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Congressman Frank.
Mr. Bush, in '84, before the company was formed, you said you had a couple of HUD projects. What did you do in conjunction with them? Did you see people at HUD yourself? What did you do?
For the project in Massachusetts,
Chestnut Hill, what was that project? Do you know the name?
I think it was called Chestnut Hill. It was a housing project. A UDAG.
A UDAG in Chestnut Hill? It's my district. Chestnut Hill consists of parts of 3 communities.
Well, I'll tell you what we did. I filed.
I'd have to pay the poor people to visit, so I don't know that. I'm just curious as to.
It's been a long time.
All right.
The developer was Mr. Carabetta. You may know him.
I know of him, yes.
I believe we were paid $3,000.
All right. I just want to know what you did with regard to HUD.
We actually went over and filed a technical assistance grant for him.
There's a technical assistance grant?
I'm sorry, forget the technical. We actually filed the UDAG application for him. And we set up a meeting with Mr. Stanley Newman, who is the...
is it the UDAG?
Right,
yes, I know.
for him to bring his group in to present.
Okay. Do you know if that was for the city of Boston?
I don't know.
Okay. And what did you personally do?
I just told you.
You personally met with Mr. Newman? Well,
yes.
I'm not sure what we means. Is
you asked me. I personally filed the application. I was there.
And you went to the meeting with Mr. Newman?
Yes.
All right. The reason I asked, this is in '84. This is less than a year after you left the vice president. One of the issues that I'm concerned with is the post-employment restrictions. What was your grade level approximately, or your pay grade at when you left the vice president's office?
I believe it was when I left.
Yes.
50,000.
50,000. Okay. The question was whether you would have been covered under some of our new proposals. The answer is that you probably would not have been at that level. When we get to the point where you formed the company with Mr. Gauvin, right, with Bush and Company, there was some question about when you formed the company and when you heard about the project, when you got the first project. Let me ask specifically, which came first, the project or the company?
I believe the project came first.
So you heard about the project and said, let's have a company afterwards.
No, Mr. Gauvin and I had been talking about the idea of doing this.
But you first who came to you with the notion of the company, of the project? You said the project came to you. Where did the project come from?
It came, the developer approached Mr. Gauvin in Puerto Rico. And
said, I'd like to do this moderate rehab. Can you help me get the money?
Correct.
And
said, I need help. I need help in Washington. I don't have anybody there personally on the ground.
You don't have anybody there personally to do what?
To be a liaison.
Well, but the project application was coming through. This is the moderate rehabilitation program?
Right.
Well, who was going to submit the application?
The city.
And why did he need somebody on the ground in Washington?
Because if he got the project, he was going to need somebody to be...
After he got it, but no, that's frankly not a good answer, because we're talking about before he got it.
Well,
why did he get it? I mean, why wasn't the city getting it?
The city did get it.
Well, why did the developer, who at that point, remember the way this works?
I know.
The city gets it, there's supposed to be a competitive bid. Why did he, even before, why does he need somebody in Washington to do what for him? What was the person, why did he need someone on the ground? I mean, the process is that the city of San Juan, I guess we're talking about, is to apply for this to HUD. Why does a developer, who theoretically has no claim on this at all until the city of San Juan does a bid procedure, why does he, quote, need someone on the ground in Washington To do what?
To advocate, we were hired by the developer to advocate this project, and that it was a good project.
Well, who was we? No, who's we? Well, there was no company then.
No, myself.
You said this came first.
Myself
right.
and
Mr. Bush, I get confused with you. Do me one favor. Unless you're Queen Elizabeth, when you mean me, don't say we, because that will confuse me. When you mean the company, you can say we. When you mean yourself, you should say I. So you were hired. He went to Mr. Govan, and Mr. Govan suggested that he hire you to be his person on the ground in Washington?
Mr. Govan called me and said, can you help this guy? He's interested in a mod rehab project that may come to the city of Bayonne.
Had you been involved at all with housing matters before that?
Only on these
on the small proceed. Okay. And what did you do? Well, did he tell you how much he was going to pay you, or how did you deal with that?
No, we never. At that point, we hadn't. We hadn't discussed it.
Well, but was the understanding you were going to do this for money, or was it? I mean.
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Govan called you. This is before we have a company, and says, "I have a developer here, and he needs somebody in Washington to lobby for this project." Did he make you were lobbying for the city of San Juan, and the developer had no particular guarantee that he was going to get the project, or was that just left unsaid?
Well, as you know, the system, the units are sent down. There's one project in Bayamon that has 180 units, and it was do you remember?
No, please answer my questions.
I'm trying to.
No, I think you're trying to give me other answers. These are very simple questions. Let me go back again. What was that you were going to do specifically?
Our job was...
Your job, not your, right? We're talking about you individually now, not Bush and Company.
Right.
This is you, no technical experts, nobody else, just you. Mr. Govan calls you and says, will you take on this job of helping this developer get these units for the city of San Juan, basically?
Right.
And what did you do?
Well, I called Miss Dean.
This is when now?
Sometime in early '85.
Okay, you called Ms. Dean. Now, you say here, one of my colleagues met Mr. Cushing.
Right.
Learned that he worked at HUD, and you said at that time the project had come to us. Now, this suggests the company, but it shouldn't say us.
Well,
it just meant you individually.
You know, you're saying the company I think started April 30th. Boom. I don't remember whether it was April, whether it was May 1st.
No, Mr. Bush, wait a minute. I didn't say
all right.
the company started. No, please listen. I didn't say the company started April 30th. I didn't say boom. I didn't say anything. I'm asking you. I asked you a question, and I'm not trying to catch you on dates, but I asked you a substantive question. Did the project for Mr. Govan predate the company? You said yes.
I believe it did.
Well, before you said yes,
I believe it did.
Frankly, I don't know how you could be in doubt about this. It's your first project, and I think it would be hard
Frank,
to not.
It's very hard, as I've said in my early testimony,
remember whether you got the project for Mr. Govan before you started the company or after?
I believe it was before. Again, I'd be glad to furnish that.
Okay. Well, you were a little more, frankly, it seems to me you're backing off a little bit from what you said earlier, and I'm skeptical, but that you're really in doubt. But okay, you say you believe it was before. Now, you said went to Ms. Dean.
No, I didn't. I said I called Ms. Dean.
You called Ms. Dean. Because Hunter Cushing suggested, you said one of my colleagues. Who was the colleague? A colleague
Jim Nunes.
Who was not then affiliated with you, but was going to be, because before the company.
Right.
Well, that's why these things are relevant.
Yeah, we had worked together.
Okay.
Starting to work together.
Mr. Nunes met Hunter Cushing at a party and said, who do you talk to about a type of project, not this project in general? When Mr. Nunes asked Mr. Cushing, did he have this project in mind, or was he just talking about mod rehab in general?
No, we had this project in mind.
All right, so he was asking him specifically about this. And he said...
Mr. Frank, let me, when he talked to Mr. Cushing, the very first time they met, I don't think he talked to him specifically about this project. You'd have to ask him.
Well, you put it in your testimony. I will ask him later, but I'm trying to see, based on your testimony, I was asking you, but when Mr. Nunes called you then and said...
He didn't call me. He came into my office because we were...
And said what to you?
He said...
I just bumped into Hunter Cushing and...
No. The person we need to call on this project
is
Debbie
project.
Dean.
Well, now you just indicated that it was this particular project.
Yes.
So you know more than you think you know.
No, it's this project.
But a minute ago you were telling me you weren't sure whether he asked about this particular project or the project in general. You just remembered that it was this project. Correct?
No. I have testimony already. It was this project that I called Ms. Dean on.
Yes, but it was therefore this project that Mr. Nunes must have asked Mr. Cushing about.
Correct.
Yeah.
No. I don't know the
No, you just told me that. Mr. Nunes came into your office and said, this is the project. Oh, you think maybe he was going to fake out Mr. Cushing and ask him about another project and then he would come in and say, but it's really this project.
No,
so
Mr.
Mr.
Frank,
Cushing wouldn't give it to Mr.
No,
Watt.
that's not the case.
Oh,
would
okay.
you, if you, I'm trying to answer your questions, and you're not giving me a chance.
Oh, yes, I am. I think you don't like the implications of some of your answers, and therefore sometimes you change them a little.
When the discussion between Mr. Nunes and Mr. Cushing took place, I don't know whether it was project-specific or whether he said, gee, we're doing a project or we're interested in doing a project at HUD. Who should we talk to? I don't know.
Project or mod rehab? Do you know if he was that specific?
I don't.
Okay. And he then came to you, though, and said, for this project, whatever he said to Mr. Cushing, he said to you, we should see or talk to Deborah Dean. Now, the question I have is this. How much was this project for?
How many units?
Yeah.
180.
And you looked up Ms. Dean and you found out she was the executive assistant to the secretary, a fairly high-ranking position.
Correct.
Did it really seem to you that the normal way for HUD to work, you said, let me ask also, you said that you were not being hired to provide political influence. You objected to that. Is that correct?
Yes.
You were going to give, what were you giving if not political influence then? Technical advice?
What was I giving?
Yeah, in this case, if you weren't using political influence, what were you doing for the developer in the city of San Juan that they wouldn't have had otherwise? Was it technical advice?
No.
Legal advice?
No.
What then?
I was the person he picked. You don't always pick.
No, but I understand that you were the person that they picked.
I was coordinating the project.
What were you doing for them?
Coordinating the project.
What do you mean coordinating the project? You're hiring the developer, or the architect? Were you working with the construction crew? Were you doing tenant selection? What do you mean coordinating the project?
We were reviewing the application. We were talking to individuals.
When you went to see Ms. Dean, did you have the application before you?
No.
Did you see the application first or Ms. Dean first?
Are you talking about the first time I saw Ms. Dean?
I'm talking about this one specific incident, yeah.
To the best of my knowledge, I did not have the application with me when I saw Ms. Dean.
So the suggestion that you were coordinating the project, that's nonsense. And I still want to go back, and you hadn't even seen the application, so you weren't being hired to review the application. The guy calls you and says, I got a developer in Puerto Rico, wants to do some mod rehab. What can you do for me? You then find out that the way to influence the decision-making process is through Deborah Dean.
I testified earlier, you were not here, that when we went to see Ms. Dean the first time, nobody in my company knew that Ms. Dean might have the power to approve this project.
You say in your testimony, you said to me now, the reason you went to her was that Mr. Cushing said she was the person who could help with this type of project.
I did not say that.
I'm going to read your testimony. At the time, this is the project we're talking about, the Los Jamins, had come to us from a developer named Mr. Gomez, and my colleague asked Mr. Cushing, who should we talk to at HUD about this type of project? You went to Deborah Dean because Hunter Cushing said she's the one who can help you with this type of project, right? Or you said, wait a minute, I take it back. You said we should talk to her about this type of project.
Right.
Just general conversation? Architectural advice? What are we going to talk to Deborah Dean about?
About the project.
Well, I don't understand what that last expostulation was. Yes, you went to Deborah Dean. You've acknowledged that you went to Deborah Dean to get help with getting this project. And you went there because
at the suggestion of
Hunter Cushing. Yeah, so what were you saying? You had no way to know that she was the one who was going to decide it. You didn't know exactly how much power she had, but you went there precisely because you hoped she would be able to help you get it. That was the purpose of going.
Of course we hoped she would help us.
I want to know what you brought. At that point, when you went to see her, you go to see the executive assistant to a secretary of a major cabinet department to talk about one small project. And you haven't read the application, and you have no real expertise in housing, and you're not going to be able to discuss the merits. You went, but you say you didn't go to use your political influence. Then what was the substance of your conversation? What did you tell Deborah Dean? How did you try to get them? What were you trying to do for her, for the developer in that conversation?
To find out what the procedures were.
You went to the executive assistant to the secretary to find out what the procedures were?
I said that
That is the
before.
most preposterous
Mr.
answer
Frank,
I have ever gotten.
well,
You did not. I just don't believe you. You did not say to Hunter Cushing, you didn't ask Hunter Cushing to find out what the procedures were, who you talked to about this type of project, and you go to the executive assistant to the secretary to find out the procedures. No one will believe that, Mr. Bush.
Well,
no one
Mr.
at
Frank,
all.
I was very used to going to the person I could at the top, if I could get to that person.
To talk to about the procedures.
To talk about anything.
If you got a mail letter, you go to the postmaster? That is extraordinary. And as a matter of fact, Mr. Bush, it demonstrates precisely the point, that you were using your political influence, because it would disarrange your department. If every citizen who had a legitimate interest, if every developer went to the top to ask basic questions, of course things wouldn't function. No one does that unless they are trying to use political influence. You're suggesting that you merely went to the executive assistant to the secretary about this project on which you had no specific knowledge other than it was a project of units under mod rehab, and that you went to find out about the procedure, is not credible.
I wanted to tell her about the project, which we did.
You didn't know much about it.
We didn't have to. We knew it was 180 units, that it was the second phase of a project in Bayamon.
And you had to go see the executive assistant to the secretary to give her this crucial information, that it's 180 units in the second phase of a project. You weren't thinking that maybe because of your common political work together and the fact that you would work for the vice president and that she would know that. Did she know that?
I didn't ask her.
So you don't know if she knew that or not?
I don't know that.
Do you know from at any time when you were dealing with Ms. Dean, did the subject of your employment with the vice president ever come up?
Oh, I'm sure it did later on.
Yeah. So you go to see the executive assistant to the secretary, and you tell us that it was not an effort to use political influence on behalf of the project. Your statement is that you were not trying to use your political influence on behalf of the project with Deborah Dean.
That's correct. My political influence, Mr. Frank, I didn't felt I had any political influence.
Mr. Bush, that is one of the least honest answers I have ever heard.
Well, it's true.
You would just finish working for the vice president. You call up the executive assistant to the secretary. You tell us now the pretense is, oh, I just wanted to get basic procedural information.
And to
That's
tell her about the project.
Go to
we were there to promote the project. I'm not denying we wanted
Promote it on what grounds? You said you haven't even read the application. You didn't know much about the project. You went there without even having any great specific knowledge about it. You're not an expert in housing. And you're saying that the notion of political influence was not a factor.
I did not feel, and I'm telling you as honestly as I can, I did not feel, nor do I feel today, that I had political influence.
You don't have any political influence by virtue of having worked for the vice president. And you don't think that people in the administration, knowing that you had been the, deputy chief of staff to the vice president, knowing that he was still the vice president, he'd just been reelected vice president, you don't think that people who were in that same administration would think anything of it? Say, oh, that's just Fred Bush. And let me ask you, when Ms. Dean saw you, do you think if you were just a private citizen with no prior governmental experience, the executive assistant and secretary would have met with you just to explain the basic procedures to you about how to make the application?
I have no way of knowing that.
You really don't?
No.
You really don't? You think that if someone called off the street? See, I think you're not being honest. I think you do know.
May I finish, please?
Not until I'm finished answering the question. You said you didn't know, and now I'm answering a second question. When you were the deputy chief of staff to the vice president, if a private citizen called and said, I'm interested and came in off the street, and I would just like to know the basic procedure for making an application for a UDAG, you would have met with that person personally?
I testified the last time. I've been a government official on several occasions. I tried to meet with every single person that called me that had a legitimate reason or a request to meet with me.
Yes, but you just begged the question. Is it a legitimate reason to get information from a high-ranking official when that information could quite easily be gotten in a more routine fashion? And you really want to tell me that honestly you believe that any citizen could go see Deborah Gordine to get some basic procedural information?
Well, I don't know that. You'd have to ask her.
I'm asking if you believe that.
Any citizen?
Right.
If they had a legitimate reason,
No,
yes.
but then you're begging the question again. Is it a legitimate reason to get basic procedural information about how to file an application for a moderate rehab program?
I wasn't just getting basic information.
Well, what else were you doing?
I was promoting the project.
On what basis?
On the project that was what our client asked us to do.
But you didn't know much about the project at the time.
No, I didn't.
So you went not knowing much about the project. You went to the executive assistant to the secretary to promote its merits. And you don't think the fact that you'd worked for the vice president was a factor?
Let me tell you that this was the second phase. The first phase had been funded in the former administration. This was the second phase. It was an eyesore. There were two towers. One was 180 units. The other was 180 units. The first one had been done, I believe, 7 years prior, 5 years prior, whatever. Now we're working on the second project. Completely different developer, different time, everything. This was a meritorious project. I knew it was a meritorious project. I don't have to know every single thing about it.
How do you know it was a meritorious project? Had you?
I believe the developer.
Okay, you knew it was a meritorious project because the developer who was going to pay you told you it was. That's good enough for you, no doubt. It does not seem to me good enough for the administrators of a program, because the issue is not just whether this is a meritorious project. It is whether it is so much more meritorious than competing projects in a scarce pool that it ought to be funded. And I'm going to close my question now. When you tell me that you don't think the fact that you'd work for the Vice President had any influence, that you think that you don't know whether she would see anybody who came in off the street to get the information about filing an application, I just don't believe you. And I don't think there's a lot more point in pursuing this. It seems to be quite clear that this is a case of cashing in on political influence. Deborah Dean, of course, has acknowledged that that's the basis on which she has operated to a very considerable extent. And it seems to be very clear. You found out that case. You found out from Hunter Cushing that this was the way to do it, and you did it.
Congressman Shays.
Mr. Bush, I know these hearings are very important to you, and anyone else who's following these hearings know that as well. And I want to focus a little bit on your involvement with HUD as it relates to you. And I also want to do it because you have information that will help us in asking other people questions. I have to just be very candid with you and tell you that I'm very uncomfortable with your testimony. I feel that you're struggling with some of the answers, and it may be that you don't remember them. You may just not like the sound of what comes out of your mouth. But we've got to face all of what you have to say in the full context of these hearings. These hearings, as I view it, were originally got started to look at HUD as it related to the mod rehab. And just one door after another has opened up. There's a scandal at HUD. It reaches all departments within the department of HUD. And we only know part of the story right now. We know with the mod rehab that it was developer-driven and that it was really run out of the central office. And we know two of the key players have come before us and haven't testified. Deborah Gordine, who took the fifth, wanting more time and wanting more documents, which this committee respected. And now Hunter Cushing, who clearly felt he needed more time, and the committee today has given him that opportunity. They both, I think, will be coming back to testify. So I'll have some questions in regards to both your relationship with Deborah Gordine and Hunter Cushing. We looked at influence peddling, and we're looking at consultants, and you have someone like James Watt, which is a lightning rod. He made maybe $300,000 to $400,000 for really literally a few phone calls and maybe a little prepping before he met with someone. He got a project where he made $300,000 to $400,000, but the Kingsley Park project, which had 312 units, without the tax credits, the federal government gave this project $28 million over the 15 years, just for the rent subsidy. Then we get to someone like Paul Manafort, who was the consultant and then also had an interest. You had a project of 326 units where the federal government, with the tax credit, spent $41 million. So one of the things we look at is the cost of consultants and what does that mean in terms of depriving people of what the consultants are getting. But more importantly, we're looking at the fact that consultants are making encouraging the federal government to make decisions that ultimately are not the best projects, that end up costing the federal government too much, that end up depriving these programs of serving the people that are supposed to, the real housing needs in this country. So when we spend $41 million for a Paul Manafort project, maybe we should have, for 326 units, only should have spent maybe $10 million. And maybe then we could have gotten a lot more projects and a lot more people benefiting. Then we come to the consultant who ends up being not an insider like James Watt. Clearly James Watt was the secretary. And so he had influence, or a Paul Manafort had influence. But now we're coming to people that we had in this last hearing, which was probably, I thought, the most interesting and yet was the longest, and we had to sift through a lot. When we had someone like a Philip Wynn, who was the former FHA commissioner, dealing with HUD, who hired a Philip Abrams, who was his assistant, who then became the FHA commissioner, who then became the undersecretary. These two gentlemen formed an organization, an agreement to work together. They involved Lance Wilson, who was the chief of staff of the secretary, or the executive, chief executive person, a predecessor to Deborah Gordine. And then you have Joe Queen, who was a former HUD employee in the Denver office. These four people teamed up. And we know of 7 projects they got that cost the federal government $162.6 million over a few years. But over 1 year, these gentlemen got 1,086 units. They got 1/6 of all the units that were available at a total cost of $137 million. So I think you can agree that we're dealing with some pretty smelly stuff, and you know, you clearly are not accused of any illegal act. You are basically someone who was able to use your influence to win a project that you feel is meritorious. But you're involved in this whole mess. And I'm trying to sort out this mess. And I also, in the process, would like to just know really your involvement. In your testimony, you said sometime, this is your last testimony, sometime in late 1984 or early 85, one of my colleagues met Hunter Cushing at a social gathering and learned that he worked at HUD. At that time, the Los Amines project had come to us from a developer named Mr. Gomez, and my colleague asked Mr. Cushing who we should talk to at HUD about this type of project. My colleague's recollection is that Mr. Cushing told him we should talk to Deborah Gordine. Now, you say a little further, Miss Dean indicated she would see us, and we went to her office to talk with her about the project. When you called Deborah Gordine for the first time, did you mention that Hunter Cushing had told you to call her?
I don't remember.
How
it's possible. I mean, I don't remember. I tried to go back, you know, 4 years ago on one phone call, which has caused so much concern. It's taken the collective memories of more than myself to try to put this together.
You know, I have sympathy for that, and I honestly believe that you could forget, because I had an experience yesterday where I just tried, in preparation for this hearing, to remember a meeting I had 4 years ago, and I had a difficult time reconstructing it. So I have some sympathy for that. But why did she see you? You say you had no influence, that you weren't using your influence. Why would she see you? What opened the door? That's what I'm trying to learn.
I can't look into her head and tell you that. I could have very well said, Hunter suggested, or Mr. Cushing suggested, we see you. I didn't know him then. I mean, I could have said that. I don't know.
In your testimony, I asked you a question. I said, let me ask you this. How do you know Hunter Cushing? You responded, I know Hunter Cushing because I met him through a social event. Then a little further, that's on page 200. And on page 207, I asked, in your friendship with Hunter Cushing, did you seek any advice from him? Did he help unlock this door of HUD to you and explain to you how this system seemed to work? You responded, yes, we did. We talked. One of the persons that Miss Dean sent us to see was Miss Cushing. Then I asked a question, well, did you know Mr. Cushing beforehand? You responded, no. Now, I know there must be an answer to all this, but I need to put it in perspective.
When I answered the questions here before, I did so with the best of my recollection. I think I was probably trying to remember too much because I wanted to answer your questions to the best of my ability. I should have probably been more circumspect, but I was trying to be as forthcoming as I could. I did not know Hunter Cushing, to the best of my knowledge, before Miss Dean sent us to meet him.
So your testimony...
Personally did not know him.
Your testimony is you were not at that social event?
I may have met him, again, going back to my former testimony. I was not at that particular social event where my colleague, Mr. Nunes, met Hunter Cushing.
Okay. So your testimony here is that there was a social event in which your colleague met.
Correct. That's my testimony today.
Your testimony before was that I know Hunter Cushing because I met him through a social event.
At that time, sir, that was the very best of my recollection.
Okay.
I had met him subsequently at social events. Not many, but here and there.
Okay.
And at the best of my recollection at that time, I remembered meeting him at a social event.
Yeah.
When I sat with my colleagues for hours and hours over the past 3 weeks and tried to reconstruct this, the meeting that I didn't realize I had forgotten took place at the social event between Mr. Nunes and Mr. Cushing came to light. You asked me the last time, did you know Mr. Cushing beforehand? And I said no. On page 207 of my former testimony.
Before you met Miss Deborah Gordine.
Correct.
Yeah. So you had the testimony, the facts are that a colleague ran into Hunter Cushing, talked about HUD, Mr.
Picked up the name of Debbie Dean somehow.
Pardon me?
Picked up the name of Debbie Dean.
Let me finish. And your colleague learned that a major player in this was Deborah Gordine in the HUD, in the mod rehab.
I do not know the discussion between Mr. Nunes and Mr. Cushing,
We should get him here.
whether it was project specific and whether they specifically talked about mod rehab. I don't know that.
Your testimony here. Oh, wait.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm in no rush, and I don't want to rush you because I really want you to be clear, and I don't want to. So if you want to, are you finished?
Yes. No, let's go.
Your testimony before us today is that you, when you went to see Deborah Gordine, you did not know that she was a major player in the mod rehab?
That is correct.
Why would it be important if you knew or not knew? I mean, in other words, is it... Okay.
I don't think it was important. But you asked me the question, so I said, no, I didn't know.
Well, I guess the reason I am asking it is, to me, it's astounding that if you had a colleague who met with Hunter Cushing, and Hunter Cushing and Deborah Gordine are the center players in this whole thing, that your testimony is that you did not have your colleague tell you that Hunter Cushing said that Deborah Gordine is someone you should see because she's important? It's not logical to me.
He said, you see Deborah Gordine.
Why?
She's the person to see.
Why?
I don't know. She could help you. She might be able to help on this project.
That's not plausible to me. It's not plausible.
Congressman, I suggest that you ask my colleague the question.
No, we will get him in here, and I just want to just be up front with you. It's just not, you're too smart a man. You want to know why you're going to see someone. And if I had an associate that said I should see so-and-so, I might ask a logical question, well, shouldn't I go to this person or that? But why would I go to Deborah Gordine?
I think you're assuming too much. You're assuming that we knew exactly what we were doing at all times. And I would like to sit here and tell you that, you know, in our as we developed this public relations business, we knew exactly what we were doing all the time. That's not the case. I had never been a lobbyist before. I had never done this before. I was not familiar with the programs. And you're trying to assume that before you take an action, like calling up the executive assistant, you know everything there is to know before you go in there. That's simply not the case.
No, it's just that, and I can put it in some perspective for you, when the Inspector General leaves out Hunter Cushing and Deborah Gordine, and everybody that comes and testifies points out that they were at the very center of this, I have a difficult time with that. I also have a difficult time with someone like yourself who somehow goes to see her and doesn't know that she's a major player. And I'm being very upfront with you, but
I knew she was a major player because she was the executive assistant. I did not know, and nobody in my company knew, that she was a major player to the extent that apparently she was in the mod rehab program.
Okay.
I mean, anybody who's the executive assistant to the secretary is a major player.
in your testimony, you minimized any real relationship that you had with Deborah Gordine or with Hunter Cushing. They were not friends. They were not people you had much contact with. I mean,
that's not true. You asked me if there was no question about is Debbie Dean a friend of yours. You did ask me if Hunter Cushing was a friend of mine. Mm-hmm. I said no. I say that today. He has never been to my house. I have met his family in passing at a social event. I mean, this is my mother and father. There they are. Goodbye. I've never been to his house. I do not socialize with him. I do not play tennis with him. I don't do anything with Hunter. So he's an acquaintance. I know him, but he's not a friend. I don't call him up to see how he's doing today.
Have you ever been to Cushing's family house?
No.
In Long Island?
I have never.
Okay. Let me just ask you, though, in the testimony, you struggled over a few points, and some of it I was very happy to have you put in writing. Just, your involvement. We talked about 3 projects. You didn't volunteer. There were more. We asked if there were more. You talked about how there were some UDAG projects, and you named them. You seem to not know all of them, so I said, fine, put it in writing. But why would you have left out the program that is the whole basis for this hearing, the technical assistance grant?
This question was asked, and I'll be glad to explain.
Wait. When the chairman discussed that program and it was in the dialogue, it was something fresh in your mind, why would you have left that out?
Out of the letter? It's in the letter.
No, out of the hearing. Why wouldn't that have been one that you would have just mentioned? Well, we were involved in that. In the hearing last time.
This question was already asked me by the chairman, and I indicated that when he started the hearing that particular day, he read an article from, I believe it was the Wall Street Journal, it could have been another newspaper, in which that project had been mentioned. And I thought, when you asked me, as you were the one that asked me to furnish the other, that project was already there on the table, so I wasn't going to bring it up again. The chairman had already made reference to the article in which it appeared.
No, he made reference to it, and you forgot about it. And you didn't volunteer it as a project that you had been involved in. You said, I can't remember some of these projects, and I said, fine, write a letter. But why did you have a hard time remembering that project?
It wasn't that I didn't remember it, Congressman. It was that I thought it had already been referred to, and what you were asking me for were new projects.
I asked you all HUD projects. I said, any other HUD-related projects. Let me go on to something.
Well,
yes, sir.
If I have to say here, it was never my intent to deceive or cover something up or not remember something. I have tried to remember everything. It was truly when the chairman started that letter or started reading that article and said that I know that was divulged in that article about that was already covered, and you were looking for other projects that we worked on. I could only remember off of my head, top of my head, 3.
Well,
and I have since told you all the others.
Let me just tell you why that answer, again, is difficult for me to appreciate the way you seem to appreciate it. We talked about the other 3 HUD projects, but you brought them up and mentioned those because they were on the record, but you didn't seem to want to talk about this project. And really, it's regrettable because that's why you're back here again. Let me get back to Deborah Gordine. I asked you about your relationship with her, and I asked you what kind of contact did you have with her during the time she was at HUD, and you said during the time she was at HUD, well, again, it's very hard to know over a 4-year period, but a few. Then I said a few, 2 or 3 or maybe 10 or 15. You said 4 or 5. I want to know your relationship with Deborah Gordine. We'll start fresh. Tell me about your relationship with Deborah Gordine.
Deborah Gordine is a social friend. I have gone to, I have had dinner with her or lunch on several occasions. She has taken my wife and I to dinner before. I I don't see her very often.
Now,
And-
she became a social friend after your meeting?
Yes.
Okay. So, what kind of, did you meet with her just 3 or 4 times during the time she was...
When you asked me that question, Congressman, at that time, without the benefit, I've stated this over and over, I'm doing the best I can. Without the benefit of having sat down and talked to my colleagues, I gave you the best answers as I remember them.
But what are the
I did
facts?
not remember. I did not, when this article came in the newspaper 3 days ago and said that my wife had written a thank you note to Deborah Dean, I had to ask my wife, what was that for?
We'll get to that. We'll get to that, so be patient. Was it 3 or 4 times that you had contact with her?
No, it was numerous, as I said in my testimony today.
It was numerous.
Yes.
Numerous means what?
Numerous probably means, I would guess, somewhere between 15 and 18 times.
Okay.
That is a good guess. And I'm including in that phone conversations and social meetings.
Well, I find myself...
I'm at business meetings and social meetings.
Okay. See, that's where, the whole issue of you're trying to, and you bring it up, I'm not bringing it up, you're saying I'm trying to be candid with you and so on. That's where I begin to question how willing you are to be candid, because it seems to me there's a big difference between 3 or 4 times and 15 or 18 times.
Congressman, may I put this in perspective, please?
Yes.
Because I understand, but when you asked me how many projects did you work on, I could remember 3. Others.
But let me just tell you why that's... Excuse me, I interrupted you. Did you want to make another point?
I'm just trying to say that at that time, it's been very difficult to resurrect these events, times, places, people. I answered to the best of my knowledge then. I'm coming back to you today, having had now the benefit of sitting down with my former colleagues and trying to remember this better.
Mm-hmm. Just that the technical assistance grant was one of the biggest. You got your firm grossed the most with that one, and it's just difficult for me to put that into perspective. So you knew Deborah Gordine, and this is that memo. It's not a memo, I apologize. This is a very personal note from Katie Bush, and it says, "Dear Debbie," it's dated September 1986. September 19th. It's just dated September 19th. It was sent in 1986. It says, "Dear Debbie, thanks so much for dinner last night. We really do enjoy that place. Great food. Also enjoyed meeting Meg and Henry. Nice people. Sorry you can't go to Russia and Paris. It would have been fun meeting up with you there. Hope to see you again soon. And again, many thanks for dinner." Personal note, dinner, close friends, close enough to talk about meeting in Europe.
Well, may I explain?
Yes.
I think I've already explained the meeting in Europe, but I'd be happy to. The other couple...
Explain the note.
My wife has good manners, Congressman. She writes personal thank you notes when someone takes us to dinner.
You know what? I think that's not the question I was really asking, because I could bring your wife in, and I think it is a very nice note, and I think that it's good that it was done. I don't mean that facetiously, but what I wanted to know was about the dinner. You had a dinner. You were close friends, correct?
Close friends, no.
Okay.
I guess this is all close friends are people that I see once a month.
You had a friendship with her.
She was a social friend. I said that in my testimony.
Okay, now you explain about the trip.
I was going on a trip to the Soviet Union with a delegation. As I mentioned, it's an organization called the American Center for International Leadership. It's a nonprofit organization, and it does leadership exchange programs with many countries of the world. And individuals pay their own way, and I paid my way. She was going to be on that trip. Something happened that she could not go. Now, on the way back from this trip, the entire delegation went from the Soviet Union to France, where they spent 2 days. Mm-hmm. My wife was going to meet me in Paris. My wife did not go to the Soviet Union. She was going to meet me in Paris. Debbie, if she had gone on the entire trip, would have gone to the Soviet Union and then back to Paris with the group. And that was the reference to seeing you in Paris.
We have the dinner. That was September and 19th, and about a month and a few weeks later, we have the mod rehab requests. And the Ponce, Puerto Rico request of 74 units is in this mod rehab request, given to Tom Demery a few weeks after he was the head of FHA. And at the bottom, it says, TD, Tom Demery, let me know, this is addressed to him, a little note, let me know when in action so I can call OMB/very important. So you had now a personal relationship with Deborah Gordine, who originally you didn't even know was a key player in mod rehab. Can I make an assumption that by September you knew she was a key player in mod rehab?
I knew she was a key player in mod rehab.
And is there any coincidence that about a month later, she's putting in a very important note to Tom Demery to make sure you get your funding for the Ponce projects?
I don't know if there's a coincidence or not. I've never seen that document before.
Okay. Well, you don't have to see the document to know that she requested it, and you were on her list of units to be funded. Not Tom Demery's list, her list. Why do you keep saying the Bayonne project was never funded? Why is that important? Why do you keep saying that? You say it all the time.
Because people keep asking me.
Well, I'm under the assumption from your letter that you made $160,000.
That's correct.
Yeah. Isn't that the important part right now? Isn't it important to know that you made $160,000 funded? Why is that important? Why do you keep saying that? You say it all the time.
Because people keep asking me.
Well, I'm under the assumption from your letter that you made $160,000.
That's correct.
Yeah. Isn't that the important part right now? Isn't it important to know that you made $160,000 because HUD put it in and authorized it as an expenditure of 180 units? They had a contract authorization of $1 million for the first year. They gave a budget authority of $17 million in '86, and that didn't even include the tax write-off. So the point is, you earned your money because you did your job. You influenced HUD to move forward in this project. Correct?
Correct.
So,
but they didn't ever actually fund the project.
yeah, that's.
We got the results that the client originally wanted.
Pardon me?
We got the results that the client wanted.
Yeah. And basically your job was just to influence HUD to give that developer those units.
No, we did a lot of technical assistance work with the developer as well.
Yeah.
I did not, but my colleagues did.
But there's no secret here, and we're being very candid with each other. Your job was to be up in Washington while people were down in Puerto Rico and other places. You were selling your influence and your ability to get the result that was wanted, which was the allocation of mod rehab units.
I was lobbying for that, yes.
Yes. Okay. The Bayonne project has a letter from the governor, the mayor, Luis Rivera. This is the mayor of Bayonne, I guess, Puerto Rico. And he writes it to Secretary Pierce. Now, this is the unit you made 160. This is the group you made 160,000 for getting HUD to agree to put in 180 units. The mayor writes a letter and then CC's Deborah Gordine. Why? And this was done in November 8, 1985. Why would you CC? Okay.
Maybe the mayor knew something we didn't. I don't know.
Okay, weren't you working on this project? Weren't you advising them? That
What's the date?
This is November 8th, 1985.
Yes, we were, but I never talked to the mayor, so I don't know why he did that. I never have met the mayor.
refresh me again, who are your partners in this project?
You mean the client or the people I was working with?
Yeah, the people you were working with. Who were your associates in this project?
Michael Govan and Jim Nunes.
Okay. Clearly, we'll get both of them before the committee, I hope. But you were all working together, correct?
Yes.
You have already mentioned to me that you knew Deborah Gordine was a major player.
We found that out,
Okay.
but we did not know that when we met her for the first time.
Right. Someone who was advising the mayor knew she was a major player. Now, this is a defense, a developer-driven project. You're advising the developer, correct? You're also trying to marshal support locally.
Correct.
I mean, that's what I would be doing.
That's correct.
Okay. So, can I make an assumption that someone in your outfit was smart enough to know that Deborah Gordine should be a player here? I'm going to get the other people there.
I would ask them, but...
Okay, let me just say what I'm going to ask those other two individuals. I'm going to ask them if they ever advised you that Deborah Gordine was a key player. And I hope that their testimony is in sync with your testimony. I just want you to know, I'm taking your advice. We're going to have them come before us. And so I'm going to ask them, so please try to remember what they may have told you. So we're going to have to get you back for a third time.
I have, Congressman. I've done the best to remember everything you've asked me.
Do you have anything else you want to add?
Well, they told me originally she was a person to talk to. That's why we called her.
Now, you have said continually that you provided no political influence. You have brought this up. I haven't brought this up. Weren't you one of the major fundraisers for the vice president?
Yes, I was.
Okay. That, to me, is a political environment. Is your testimony before us that you had no political influence with people?
I guess it's a perception, Congressman. I never felt, I was a staff person. I never felt that I had political influence.
Define your staff position.
I was the fundraiser, but I was not the chairman. I was the paid political fundraiser.
Yeah. You were like the executive director.
Correct.
Okay. You were the guy who was running the show.
Well, you're doing the day-to-day, yes.
Yeah, I mean, the other people are volunteers. They're
Correct.
working part-time.
Right.
It's your operation.
I never felt, and I never felt, and maybe it's just my perception. We have a different perception here. I don't feel I have great political influence.
Well, you know,
Would the gentleman yield?
yes.
I just wonder if you became ambassador to Luxembourg because of your diplomatic expertise.
No, you know,
I'd be glad to try to answer
let
that.
me ask you, that's something that follows later, and it may be a pertinent question. I notice a smile on your face, Charlie, but this is something, I want to come back because that's something now, this is something back then. On your grant for this CDBG Technical Assistance Program, in the back, you have a description of the firm. Now, I would not ask you this question if you did not submit it as a grant application. And it was referred to in part already, but you described the firm. You say, with over 23 years of combined experience in Washington, D.C., it has built a solid foundation that extends to the White House, to Congress, and throughout the federal agencies. You also say, as Deputy Chief of Staff to the Vice President, he has been able to develop an extensive network throughout the White House and most federal agencies, as well as with congressional leaders in both the Senate and House of Representatives. Doesn't this strike you as someone who says, I've got some political influence, I've got some clout here?
Can I say, you know, access to people, in my opinion, is different than influence. And whether I had access to them, that's one thing. Whether I could influence them or another, that's another.
Why would this be put on a grant application to a government agency that's supposed to look at the merits of the issue?
I believe, and I don't know this because I was not the one who filed the application, I believe that a brochure or whatever, what you want to call it, of our company was requested to be attached.
But by whom? General Yield, by whom? Requested in the past?
By HUD. I believe that.
If the General Yield, just for a second, you're saying that HUD asked that the brochure of the public relations company be attached to a CDBG application?
I think it's pretty common to attach any information.
No, the question was, it requested? I want to know, you're telling me that HUD requested the brochure?
I said I believe they did. I don't know that because I did not.
Can I ask on what basis you believe that?
I don't know. I just believe they asked that.
But you don't have any basis for the belief?
No, it's just what I believe.
I think it would be highly inappropriate for HUD to request this. With hindsight, do you think it was proper to include this little document?
It's background material. It's biographical material. Do they request biographies on the principals of the company who's applying for the technical assistance grant? Mr. Frank, I think they do, but I don't know that for sure. It seems reasonable. If I was somebody at HUD, I'd want to know of some background on the principals of the company who were applying for a grant.
Gentlemen, you have 1 second, because I just want to get. I thought you said this is on the CDBG. This is not under discretionary.
Same thing.
So the Secretary's discretionary fund and CDBG aren't the same thing, is that?
The purpose of this project was to maximize the CDBG funds that were given to San Juan.
But it didn't come out of CDBG fund?
No. What's that?
I just feel like I'm into the woods.
So let me say to you that I think it was inappropriate that should have been included. And if any HUD agency or people requested that you somehow describe your political influence as being appropriate in a government grant, I'd like to know who they were. This is the grant, and this was a letter that Secretary Pierce, which is a technical assistant grant. It's a conditional approval. The application was submitted in June 17th, 86. In 1986, June 17th, 1986. And in March 28th, 1986, we had the Secretary had given a preliminary conditional approval. So this preceded this. Why would the Secretary give a preliminary approval of a grant that's being submitted later?
You do a concept proposal before you do the final.
So he would give a conditional approval on a concept before you apply?
Congressman, that's my understanding. I was not submitting these documents. I did not do the documents. That's to best of my knowledge, that was the procedure.
Well, who submitted these documents and did these? Who should we talk to?
Mr. Govan.
Govan. Could we put another person on? This is Mr. Govan, you said?
Mr. Govan.
Govan. He's the one who submitted these documents.
Correct.
So basically we have the Secretary approving, and by now you've had contact with Deborah Gordine, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Did you talk to Deborah Gordine before you submitted this in June?
Yes, we asked her about this project, and she told us to talk to Mr. Gilliam.
Okay, and you talked obviously to Deborah Gordine and whomever else at HUD before you got a conditional approval from Mr. Pierce.
I may have talked to Deborah Gordine, or someone in my office may have talked to Deborah Gordine in the interim. I don't remember a conversation with Deborah Gordine after the initial conversation when she told us to talk to Mr. Gilliam.
When you have a technical assistance grant, it's the policy of HUD, because it's a very discretionary kind of program, and a lot of subjective questions are raised. You had an audit of this that took place in August 25, 1986. They don't have anything good to say about your proposal. Nothing. They question almost every figure in it.
Remember, Congressman, there were 6 different rewrites.
Okay,
I think you're dealing with the first one.
Okay, let me just say that what was approved by Secretary Pierce before even the application was submitted, which is a conditional
The concept proposal.
conditional approval. It was conditional, I know that. Before there was an application submitted. Of the $296,000, they questioned the cost of 276 of them. So, I mean, this project really had some trouble, at least with the IG. Now, is it possible that maybe it took 6 drafts because it was such a bad project?
This has already been discussed, but I'd be glad to give you my feeling about it.
Why do you keep saying it's already been discussed?
Because the chairman asked me the same questions.
Right.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'd be glad to answer the question. If we had submitted one draft and there were no questions asked, if I were sitting in your shoes, I'd be very skeptical about that. Fact is, this was worked on for over 2 years. There were 6 redrafts, working with the technical staff all the time.
Will my colleague yield for a second? Mr. Bush, you are attempting to create the impression that in response to input by the technical staff, the draft of the project was improved as it went along. Is that correct?
The technical staff, and again, I was not dealing with this, so I'm getting this from my colleagues. The technical staff who worked with him on this would say, these are problems. These problems, we don't like this, we don't like that. You need to go back and do it over.
But when you say we don't like this, we don't like that, you mean technical aspects of the proposal?
Technical aspects.
Well, let me read to you from the evaluation, which has nothing to do with technical aspects. Mr. Bush has agreed that the administrative costs were overestimated and has reduced the original proposal by 18% from $362,802 to $296,380. Now, that's not a technical matter. You presented not only was the proposal technically flawed, but it was bloated in terms of the dollar figure you attached to it, and they told you, this is not going to fly, and you said, okay, I cut it by 18% from 362 to 296. These are not technical revisions, as, let me finish, please, as that term is normally understood. The impression you are trying to create on this issue, as I'm afraid the impression you are trying to create unsuccessfully on other issues, like your lack of political influence, I don't think there is a child over the age of 6 who can believe that. But the impression you are trying to create is that this is a finely honed technical proposal, that first there was a concept which had some flaws in it, and as you went along, those flaws were eliminated, and then in the final analysis, you had a fine project. That is contrary to the facts, Mr. Bush. In the final stage, the proposal was rejected by the technical staff. And one of the so-called flaws in the project, according to the HUD official document, is that you overestimated the administrative costs, and you were told this, so you said, okay, I'll cut $70,000 from the administrative cost. Those were the kinds of problems you had.
First of all, I didn't, because I didn't do the project myself. You keep saying you.
Well, let me read you the HUD document. Mr. Bush has agreed that the administrative costs were overestimated and has reduced the original proposal by 18% from $362,802 to $296,380. It doesn't say the company, it doesn't say your associates, it doesn't use other names, it says Mr. Bush has agreed.
I never talked to the technical staff about this project. I don't know how they could know that I agreed.
Well, let me tell you who wrote this memorandum. This memorandum is from Mr. Joseph D. Monticello, Regional Administrator. Have you ever talked to him?
No.
Never?
Not to my knowledge. I know my colleagues have talked to him.
and your colleagues conveyed then the impression that you agreed to reduce the administrative costs.
I don't know that without asking him, but that's certainly possible. And I have to ask you again, I mean, you're reading from a document dated in 1986, when the final draft of this was not till 1987.
Yes, I fully grasp that. You have made that point clear repeatedly. The initial proposal was so unacceptable that you had to make it minimally acceptable. And even when you tried to make it minimally acceptable, the professional staff rejected it. We all understand that.
Is there a document showing that the staff rejected?
It's in my hand.
What's the date?
I'll give you the whole document. Staff will take it down to Mr. Bush.
This document, the point I'm trying to make is that there's not one document in here dated 1987. It's all dated 1986. So I don't think there's a final early 86. So I don't think this evaluation was an evaluation of the final product. This is an evaluation of possibly the first one, but since the final product was approved in 87 and there's nothing in here dated anything before 86, I hope I'm making myself clear.
You are making a point which is a point contrary to fact. Let me tell you what the facts are. You are making a point, but the point you are making has no validity. That's the problem, Mr. Bush. This is a discretionary fund that Secretary Pierce has at his disposal. Control over it is in the hands of either Mr. Pierce or Ms. Dean. We will find out which one. You come in with a proposal and they approve it, contingent upon your shaping it so that it becomes minimally acceptable. Those are the facts.
Mr. Chairman, may I be allowed to address the
Please.
chair a moment?
Please.
I hope you're being fair with my client. As I read this,
We intend to be fair with your client.
it says right on the front page, and this was the initial report.
That is not correct.
Well, or if it's an early report.
As a matter of fact, it is, if you turn a few pages, you will find that Mr. Monticello says that Mr. Bush agreed to cut back the administration. This was well into the process.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to quote from the front page of this in stating, quote, while the proposal has considerable merit and is recommended for funding by the regional administrator for Region 2, the proposal contains several deficiencies which HUD review has found to be uncorrected in Bush & Company's revised proposal. OPPD therefore concurs in the recommendations of the two reviewers who recommend against funding. I think that's quite different than the impression.
Your point just proved the statement I made earlier, Counsel. The political appointee recommends approval over the objections of the professional staff. That's the point I have repeated to you and to Mr. Bush time and time again. The political appointee was pushing it despite professional staff rejection.
Cy Angel is who this memorandum is from. She's the director of Office of Policy or Program Policy Development. I think that's the technical staff, Mr. Chairman. And I'm just clarifying that. So
no, you are not clarifying it. You are confusing it. If you'll return the document, it's a very damaging document, and I tried not to quote from it extensively. You may be getting extensive quotes from it because it's an embarrassing document in terms of the long laundry list of flaws and deficiencies in the proposal. all set aside, and at the political level it is approved. Could I have the... I thank my colleague for yielding.
Sure, anytime. The only two people, it appears, who were very enthusiastic about this proposal were the Secretary, even at its original stages, and the other political appointee, which was Monticello, who was the regional director.
Yeah, I found the reference, if my colleague will yield. Mr. Du Bois L. Gilliam, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Program Policy Development and Evaluation. Non-concur. He does not concur.
Are you addressing that to me, Mr. Chairman?
No, I'm just...
He was a political appointee.
That's right, and he's not concurring with the recommendations of the technical staff. That's my point. The technical staff wanted to reject it, and the political appointee does not concur in the rejection of the technical staff, the professional staff.
Was this the case on, do you have the other reviews as the...
We will make available to you the entire file, Mr. Bush, because we want you to have access to it. The fact remains, and in your testimony you stated it, you talk about 6 drafts, as if these in fact would have been sort of technical improvements along the way. Not at all, not at all. The program was totally unacceptable initially. It remained unacceptable to the professional staff throughout its entire application period, but the political people overruled the professional staff. I thank my colleague for yielding.
I have tried to explain what I know about this project. I did not write this proposal, and I think that you'll find when you talk to Mr. Govan, who is the person who did it, you can ask him those questions. You'll get more forthcoming answers because he knows more about it.
I understand. Your point is that basically this was not a project, it was your company, you were the lead, but you didn't handle the daily activity of it. But let me say, I think the committee will have your associates come in, and when they come in, it would be advisable for them to have all 6 drafts. And we want to see how substantive, because you've made a very important point. And if you're, it's an important point, I don't know if it's a telling point, it's important that you constantly rework the project. What we have basically, though, is in March, the Secretary signing off on something that was closer probably to over 300,000, correct?
This is my understanding, all right? My understanding is that on a technical assistance grant, there's a sign-off on the concept.
Right.
No money is given to this project. No money was given to this project until the final approval in 1987. So I understand that approval to say this is the kind of project we can do, have them continue drafting it, have them continue working on it. But there's no money comes out of that project until it's funded at the very end.
If you can remember, do you remember how much this project was going to cost in the very beginning?
I don't have a clue.
Was it over 300,000?
Congressman, the chairman says the original request was, the original TA was for more. That's possible. I did not know that.
But by the time the IG looked at it, it was 296. And ultimately, and he questioned the statistics on almost every part of it. And ultimately, you were funded, I think, for about 253 or something in that range.
I believe it was 268.
268. So, in spite of the fact the IG questioned almost every part of it, it was still funded for a sizable amount. Let me just conclude by making sure that we just understand the relationship you had with Hunter Cushing, and then I'm all finished. What was your relationship with Hunter Cushing?
Hunter is an acquaintance. I know him.
And when did you know him?
I believe I met him for the first time when Miss Dean sent us to see him.
Okay.
He has never been to my house for dinner.
Okay.
We have had dinner. I have had dinner with him at restaurants on probably 2 occasions. I have never been to his house. I met his family in January, perfunctorily at a reception here.
Have you ever had him out to dinner, ever had him over, have you ever had a dinner with him like you might have had with Deborah Gordine?
Yes.
Okay. So they're dinner acquaintances.
Together, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
They came together.
Okay.
We know.
With that last answer, I forgot my next question. I literally forgot my next question. It's, were they together more than once when you were there? Did you ever have them? I'm smiling through my tears here, but was that the only time that Deborah Gordine and Hunter Cushing had dinner with you together?
I believe there were 2 occasions.
Okay. See, they're the key players in this whole thing, and you...
I believe one of those dinners was at China Rose.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to remember where they were,
I appreciate it.
but I don't remember where the other one was. And these were social events. I mean, we did not discuss HUD business or our business at these events, these dinners.
You know, that's a pretty strong statement. I mean...
To my knowledge, they did not. Miss Dean came to my house on 2 occasions. Once for a dinner party and once for a wedding reception. We had about 80 people for my colleague's wedding reception.
I'm going to, basically, you know, I have a hard time knowing whether someone's a friend, a really good friend, and so on. I'm going to say they're dinner acquaintances, both of them. And you had dinner with them twice. Did you ever have dinner with either one of them separately? Well, the time that there was the note, obviously, was one time that Deborah Gordine was not with Hunter Cushing, correct?
No, she brought a couple friends.
But Hunter Cushing wasn't there at that
No,
day. Yeah.
I don't believe he was.
And you volunteered, because I didn't ask you, because you made the statement. I asked you, but you made the statement that at no time did you ever talk about HUD business when you met and had dinner with Deborah Gordine or Hunter Cushing.
To the best of my recollection, and there were other people there, we did not discuss HUD business at these dinners.
Okay. Hunter Cushing, reportedly, we have people who have come to our committee and testified that he wanted very much to go over to the Department of Department of Commerce. And we have people who have come to our committee and said, not in open testimony, but said that you were a major player in helping him get his job at Commerce. What role did you play?
He wrote me a letter asking if I would recommend him for a position.
Mm-hmm.
We had forms, and this was at the transition. They were standardized forms which allowed us to transmit a resume quickly without having to write a letter or a separate memo or whatever. Mm-hmm. I took one of the forms and I filled it out, which meant indicating I said, how long a relationship? I said, known for some time. I think that's what I said. It said, worked on, there was a box, did this individual work on the campaign? I believe I wrote no, hatched, as I would for anybody who was hatched, to let them know that...
This is the form that you referred to earlier with...
Correct. That's what I did. That's all I did.
You never made a phone call?
I never made a phone call.
Did anyone ever phone you?
About Hunter?
Yes.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Thank you.
Congressman Schumer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would say, Mr. Bush, that lots of your testimony is just not persuasive. I just want to ask you, well, let me ask about a couple of other things. These dinners, who paid?
Obviously, the dinner that my wife wrote the thank you note, Miss Dean paid.
Right.
The other dinners, I paid.
You paid?
Yes.
You paid for everybody there?
Well, when I say I paid, it might have been
Bush and Associates?
Might have been Bush and Associates, might have been the 3 of us together.
What do you mean 3 of us together?
Well,
who's the us?
Jim, Mr. Nunes, and Mr. Govan. They may have. I think they were at one.
You
of
often, the 3 of you went to dinner.
Yes.
Were they dinner acquaintances of yours as well?
They were my partners.
No, I understand that, but they were dinner acquaintances. I mean.
Well, more than dinner acquaintances. I mean.
They were friends.
Yes.
And they were also friends with Ms. Dean. and Mr. Cushing dinner acquaintances?
Yes.
And all of you went to dinner and never discussed HUD business?
There was no
This
reason.
is wild.
Well, Congressman, there was no reason to discuss HUD business.
Why did it so happen, if this was just a social event, that your two partners and you who were working on the thing all had dinner? Did you always have dinner together with them?
No.
Okay, so you or the partnership or your partners paid for dinner. On how many occasions with Mr. Cushing?
To the best of my knowledge, 2 times.
Do you know how much the bill was approximately?
I don't know. Maybe.
Would it be more than $100?
For how many people? Maybe.
Well, I wasn't there.
Well, I know. I'm trying to remember. I don't know.
Were there 5 people at this dinner? The
My
3
wife
of you,
came along as well.
4, okay, the 4 of you, their spouses?
They're not. Well, they were not married at the.
Fine.
Well, one
Did
was
they bring anyone?
not to my knowledge.
Did Deborah Dean bring anyone?
No, not to my knowledge.
Just she. And did Hunter Cushing bring anyone?
No.
Okay, right. Where were these dinners? Dinners with, how many dinners were there? You said there were 2 with Cushing and Dean together.
Right.
There were how many with Cushing alone?
I don't think any.
None. How many with Dean alone?
I don't think any, except the dinner party at my home.
Okay. Did you ever get any gifts for either Cushing or Dean?
Get any?
Purchase any, give any
Yes.
gifts? Can you tell me about them?
Bottle of liquor at Christmas time.
Bottle of liquor, 1 bottle of liquor.
Correct.
To each.
Correct.
It wasn't one of these 1942 bottles of wine that cost $600.
No.
You know, the kind that broke at Sotheby's recently? No?
No.
Okay. That was it. No other gifts?
No other gifts.
Any other benefits you conferred upon them other than taking them to dinner and getting them bottles of liquor?
No. In fact, Miss Dean purchased a very expensive wedding. Well, I won't say give her. I don't know how much she paid for it. It seemed to be an expensive wedding present for my partner.
All right. My next question involves, you listed that Bush and Associates did 8 projects on this list. Do I have to name them? You know it. It's your letter of the committee, June 9th. Should I read them? Would that be helpful for the record, I guess? Ponce, Puerto Rico, Bayamon, Puerto Rico, Temple, Texas, San Juan, Puerto Rico, Manatee, Puerto Rico, Manatee, Puerto Rico, Caugus, Puerto Rico, and the technical assistance for San Juan. Those are the 8. Are there any others that Bush and Associate worked on?
Congressman, in my statement today, I listed the other projects that were inadvertently left out of that
Of this letter?
Yes.
And can you just repeat those for the record?
I'll do my best.
How many were there?
Well, I've included 2 that were not done, that were done prior to Bush and Company, just for the benefit of total disclosure.
Right, those were done by you alone?
Well, me and Mr. Nunes.
Using Mr. Nunes, but not as part of Bush and Company?
Correct. And so there were 3 additional ones that were Bush and Company.
Okay.
I think that's right.
Right. What about a property disposition project in San Patricio?
Yes,
Puerto Rico?
That's listed right here.
Right where? I can't...
It's on page 5.
Right.
Such third, in an effort to make sure my testimony is completely accurate, I sent a letter to Chairman Lantos on June 9th, 1989 regarding...
I see it.
And I had referred to it as a land
Can you
sale.
tell us about that project?
To the best of my knowledge, the governor of Puerto Rico.
Governor of Puerto Rico.
The governor of Puerto Rico. No, the present governor. The present governor, who's still the governor.
He was governor then and governor now, or just governor now?
He is still governor. It's Governor Colon, I believe.
He was governor then?
Yes.
All right, go ahead.
There was a parcel of land that HUD had given to to San Patricio.
Right.
To be used for
low income.
Low income. It had sat there undeveloped, undone anything for 10 years. The governor did not want this project, this land to be used for its intended source.
Did he own it?
I don't know.
You don't know who owned it?
I don't know who owned it.
Who hired you? The governor of Puerto Rico?
No. Oh, let me see. I'm trying to think who was the actual client. Just bear with me if you would, please.
Sure. Now, this is important.
I don't know, I believe, although I'm not sure, that it was the municipality of San Patricio.
But you don't know.
I don't know.
You know, Mr. Bush, let me just interject here. I want to read you some more of your previous testimony. This is page 209. This is me questioning you. I say to you, I have to say, Mr. Bush, you seem like a very nice fellow, but your story doesn't add up. Let me go over a few things again. You just picked out of the phone book all of the names, the assistant secretary, this one, that one, assistant secretary. You picked Miss Gordine's name out of it. You say, no, there was a directory, Congressman, put out by someone. I ask, I mean out of the HUD book. You say, Mr. Bush, well, it's the first name that appears under the secretary. Mr. Schumer, remember, you're under oath. No one suggested to you ahead of time that she would be the right person to call? No one? Mr. Bush, no one suggested to me. And now you come in now and say, yes, somebody did suggest it to you, and I know you've changed your testimony on that. But you're getting close to the line.
Congressman.
And here, you've come back, you're supposed to review these projects, you had to update your list because you didn't have them listed in a letter, and you're telling me you don't know who owns it? What kind of review did you do?
Congressman, I said in my last testimony, when I was here before, when asked this question, again, I said, I understand your puzzlement, and I have said, I believe, to Mr. Morrison, that without going back and talking to my colleagues...
Yeah, I heard you read that before. All I'm saying is, here is I was asking you a question, you left it unclear. Now I'm asking you, on a project that you had to put back into the list, who was the owner, and you don't know?
I was not the operational person on this project.
That's not the issue. The issue is not what happened 2 years ago. The issue is what happened in the last week, is you're supposed to be reviewing this stuff. And one gets the feeling you're not trying to come clean with the committee.
I have. I don't know every detail. I'm sorry.
Let me ask you, okay, so let's go over this. You don't know who owned it, but you were going to work to switch two pieces of property, right?
It wasn't really a switch. Here's what they wanted to do. The governor said, the governor's idea was, I want to keep this as a green park. And that was what I understand the municipality of San Patricio wanted. And instead of developing the whole project, because it was a huge piece of property, the whole area, the governor and the city of San Patricio wanted an agreement with HUD that they would only do part of it.
They hired you.
Yes.
How much were you paid?
We were paid $12,000.
Did it get done?
It's still under negotiation.
Okay. Did Hunter Cushing work on this?
Yes, he did.
Okay. What would I tell you? What would you say if I told you a reliable source at HUD said that Cushing worked very hard to get this project done so that you would feel obligated to land him a job at Commerce?
Well, I'd feel that was absurd, because I never...
Did you ever talk to Cushing?
Absolutely not.
About a job at Commerce?
No, never.
It was just in his head that you might be getting the job, if this statement is correct.
That's
is that
correct.
Right? You never mentioned a thing. You and he never talked. Never.
Never.
Not 1986, not 1987, not 1988, about getting him a job at Commerce.
No.
Okay. My next question relates to this memo that the chairman, Mr. Lantos, had asked you about, memo for Tony Beniti. Now, you worked in the office of vice president. Let's clarify. Does the vice president have anything to do with funding projects in HUD?
Sir, I worked in the vice...
Answer the question.
Not to my knowledge.
So wouldn't it be highly unusual, unless something different was going on, that a memo from Deborah Gordine would go to Tony Beniti, whoever he was, at his request, outlining everything that's going on in Puerto Rico in terms of programs?
Tony Beniti did not work in the vice president's office when I did.
I understand that. I'm asking you from your knowledge in terms of the vice president's
I never
office.
knew this kind of memo existed.
Did you ever talk to anyone who is currently in the Vice President's office about any of the projects in this memo?
No.
Never?
No, not to my knowledge. I never did.
Never. Okay. Would you say it's unusual for the Vice President to get a memo on projects that are approved and not approved going on at HUD?
No.
Or his office? It's usual? Happens all the time?
It's not a memo to the Vice President.
To the Vice President's office.
I could guess why. I could guess. There might have been a trip coming up to Puerto Rico.
So we could check that, right?
You could. I'm guessing.
When you worked there, did the coordinator of special projects deal with trips?
We did. We never had when I was there. I don't remember having a person titled coordinator of special projects, and I never saw a memo like this when I worked there.
If someone was going on a trip, would they need all the information about all the grants, how much they were, and what their status was?
No, but there's a lot of information supplied to the Vice President
I have never
before
heard
he goes on a trip that he doesn't really need.
Mm-hmm. Okay. My next question deals with here. Sorry, I'll have it in a minute. Oh, yeah. No. You went over with Mr. Shays that the HUD staff and the chairman, that the HUD staff, oh, here is the other page I was looking for. Have you ever said to anybody about either the Los Yamines project or the Ponce project that if you pay me now, I'll be able to tell you when funds are available?
Absolutely not.
You never said that
No.
to anybody. Did you ever operate in that way, that someone was paying you for information that was available in HUD?
For information?
For information. Again, other sources have said to this committee that you have said, if you pay me now, I'll be able to tell you when funds were available, and they believe it was about the Los Jimenez project or the Ponce Puerto Rico project. Again, I'd remind you that, you know, if all these things keep adding up and up and up, and there are things that actually happened and your memory starts failing you...
Congressman, I, to the best of my knowledge, never told anybody that.
Did you tell anybody that about any project?
No.
Did you ever accept a fee for simply getting someone some information at HUD?
No, not to my knowledge. We never accepted a fee for just getting information at HUD.
Can I ask you another question? How much money did Bush and Associates make from all its government consulting over the in 86, 87, 80 till you left?
I can't answer the question. I can tell you how much from HUD or HUD-related projects.
I know we have that number, 500 and some odd thousand.
That's really not correct.
Okay, then give me your number.
Because I don't include $203,000 that came to my company that went to outside sources, outside contractors. That did not.
I didn't ask you profit. I said how much did they pay you? That's the $500,000 number. Did you lobby in other did you do the same kind of work for other agencies or just HUD?
No, we did work in other agencies as well.
Tell me which ones.
I'm going to supply that information because I don't want to start in a guessing game about what we did for
about how much. Did you make more money from HUD than you're consulting with all the rest of the agencies put together?
No.
So HUD was not the majority share of the money.
I would say it would probably be about equal.
About equal. So you made, Bush and Associates, to your recollection, we're not going to hold you to a fine number, made over $1 million in these kinds of fees.
No.
At income.
No. No, because I'm thinking of the number. I'm thinking of the number of approximately $392,000 from HUD projects.
Okay, so it was 600 and some odd.
Something like that. I mean, I don't know.
Let me ask you another question. You became fundraiser for George Bush at what point in time?
January of 1979.
79. And you finished that job when?
When the campaign was over in 1980.
In 1980. Did you raise money for the Bush presidential campaign in 1988?
Yes.
What was your title then? Any title?
Deputy Finance Chairman.
That was a unpaid job?
That was a paid job.
That was a paid job?
Yes.
Did you do any consulting during that time? Did you make money from any of these projects during the time that you were Deputy Finance Chairman?
I drew a salary from Bush & Company.
You drew a salary as well from Bush & Company?
Yes.
How much was your salary as Deputy Finance Chairman?
Was paid as a consultant, not as
How much was your consultant fee?
At the
Deputy Finance.
Deputy Finance Chairman, I believe it was $6,000 a month.
Okay. How many months did you do it?
How much time do we have? The second guy's ready? 6 minutes. Can we come back? Yeah. Are you going to ask 2 questions?
While we're looking...
There was a sequence of, you're asking me about George Bush for president, which was one entity, but...
Or you were paid as a consultant to other fundraising entities as well?
That was not the beginning. The beginning was the Political Action Committee.
Right.
Okay. So
you were paid by others.
And one stopped and the other started, so I don't know.
Did you ever raise money from the same people that you helped on some of these consulting projects?
No, I never solicited clients.
Yes.
Never.
Mr. Schumer, I think that we're going to break at this point. The chairman will be back momentarily, and until he returns, the subcommittee will stand in recess.
I'll have some more questions
yes,
a little
so
later.
will I.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll both have some questions.
Members of the House Government Operations Subcommittee on Employment and Housing are now taking a recess. C-SPAN 2's live coverage of this hearing on the current housing contracts investigation will continue as soon as subcommittee members reconvene.
You're watching C-SPAN 2. C-SPAN 2 and its companion network, C-SPAN, are nonprofit cooperative efforts of the cable television industry, created to provide unique public affairs programming to a nationwide audience. In addition, C-SPAN 2 is underwritten in part by the following.
Imagine a world where there are no limits on discovery. DuPont, we make the things that make a difference and are proud to support television that makes a difference.
Up next, a news briefing on the 1990 campaign plans of Emily's List, which describes itself as a political network for Democratic women.
Good morning. It's nice to have you all with us. You can enjoy your breakfast, and I think I'll begin, and so we can get everything covered in the hour that we have. My name is Ellen Malcolm, and I'm the president of Emily's List. As you all know, we focused on the House elections in the 1988 elections, and one of the reasons that we did that was because before the election, I did an analysis of the breakdown between the Democratic and Republican women in the House and the progress we were making, which is interesting because as the only Democratic women's political organization, nobody had really looked at the partisan differences between the progress women were making. Well, in 1972, on the eve of the women's movement, there were 14 Democratic women in the House and 2 Republican women. By 1986, the 2 Republican women had gone to 11, and the 14 Democratic women had actually declined to 12. So with all our work in trying to help women, we were not making progress and actually losing ground for Democratic women in the House. We decided to focus on House races and turn that around, and in fact, we did turn it around. With the election of Jolene Unseld, Neil Lowy, and Jill Long, we've now had the greatest increase for Democratic women in the House in 26 years. So we've made history and made some progress there, but as you will all agree, since there are less than 6% women in the Congress, we have a long way to go. We basically have two choices to elect Democratic women to the House. We can run against incumbents, which we all know is virtually impossible since more than 98% of them win their re-election bid, and we can run in open seats. And the '88 election really was very instructive for us because we took on a new strategy with Jolene Unseld that worked very well. We knew that Don Bonker was looking to run for the Senate, and we knew that that seat was going to open up. And so we went in and sought out a Democratic woman to run in that race. Celinda Lake went in and met with people in the state, and everybody said Jolene Unseld was the candidate to run in that election. So we recruited her, we worked with her throughout the election, helped her put a campaign together, helped her raise early money to begin that race, and really was her partner in that campaign that helped her become a new member of Congress. So that idea of identifying an opportunity and going in and finding qualified women to run and going through the process of helping them put together a campaign, we decided was the way we needed to go in the future. So we're really trying to figure out effective ways to make the 1990s a real decade of opportunity for Democratic women. Well, we have two choices, I think, as we look into two approaches that we want to take to figure out how to break through the system and get women into major races in the 90s. The first is that we have to make sure we can find the opportunities, identify them, and take advantage of them. And so we are looking particularly at the reapportionment process and how that's going to open up seats in 1992 and carve out some new opportunities for women. It's interesting to note that Democratic women have only increased in the House 3 times in the past 2 decades. The last election, I think in large part because of our help with those campaigns, and in 1972 and in 1982, after the census and after the reapportionment process. So we really see the 92 elections as a real opportunity to have open seats and to help Democratic women break through. The other part of our project is to really learn the most we can learn about what's happening with Democratic women candidates so that we can be their most effective allies in helping them shape their campaigns in winning ways. And so we have this two-pronged approach to go into the 90s, identify the opportunities and take advantage of them and become the real experts on helping Democratic women move ahead. Well, we've created a very effective financial network, I think, and really are moving in a much more political vein to join our political expertise with our financial power. And so we've hired Rosa DeLauro as our executive director to put together a new political plan for us. And so it's really Rosa who's the architect of the political plan for the women moving into the 90s. And at this point, I'd like to turn the rest of the program over to her.
Good morning. Thank you, Ellen, and thank you all very much for coming this morning. As Ellen pointed out, reapportionment is a great opportunity that only presents itself once every 10 years. And I think if you look around, you'll see that we're ready for it. The measure of our success, however, will be the increase in number of the Democratic women elected to the United States Congress. And this is what the Majority Project is all about. It means not leaving our fate to chance. And it means working systematically to take advantage of the dramatic increase in open and marginal seats under the state-by-state congressional reapportionment. Open seats, as you know, provide our best hope. 98% of the incumbents, 409 of whom are men, win re-election. And while women improved their position in the Congress in '98 and with Jill Long in 1989, the odds lie really with history in the reapportionment process that really can provide us with a burst of opportunity in open seats. Identifying the newly created seats is really going to be the key to our success in the Majority Project and of our goal in increasing the Democratic women in the House.
We now leave this recorded program on campaign plans for the 1990s in order to fulfill our commitment to bring you live coverage of a hearing held by the House Government Operations Subcommittee on Housing.
Read from the Inspector General's report a few relevant paragraphs which deal with the issue we talked about earlier. This is the IG report dated August 25, 1986, on the project submitted by Bush and Company. Summary reads as follows.
Mr. Chairman, we don't have a copy of that. If you have an extra copy, we'd be greatly appreciative of being able to see that.
We will try to supply you one, and I'll be happy to let you have mine when I finish the relevant portions. Based on our review of Bush and this is the summary. Based on our review of Bush and Company's cost and price proposal, it is our opinion that the data is not acceptable as a basis for negotiation of price. The price proposed was generally not based on historical cost data or projections of reasonable costs expected to be incurred. Instead, the majority of pricing was based on the amount of funds expected to be available for the award. Such a pricing proposal is not acceptable in accordance with Federal Acquisitions Regulation 15801. The IG then goes on to say, please listen to this closely, we have questioned $276,180. We have questioned $276,180 of the $296,380 total cost proposed. So out of 298, they questioned 276. Questioned costs are in the areas of direct labor, fringe benefits, travel, consultants, other direct costs, and overhead. Questioned costs are costs unallowable by law, contract, or HUD policies or regulation. And then under general comments, the IG says the following. We recommend that no award be made until your office further reviews and determines that there is no duplication of effort or potential conflict of interest situation between the proposed statement of work and existing Bush and Company contracts. The staff proposed for the project is actually available at the levels proposed. Bush and Company was generally reluctant to fully disclose and support the nature of all business activities of the company and its principals. We recommend that OPC and the Program Office require a full and detailed disclosure of Bush and Company's other business activities to preclude any duplication of effort or potential conflict of interest situation prior to award. Then comes a very interesting paragraph that you may want to react to, Mr. Bush. The project supervisor's availability for the level of effort proposed on this project is in doubt. The position will be filled by the Vice President of Bush and Company. Per his own account, he is currently working a 12-hour day without this project. In addition, the President of Bush and Company reportedly will not be available for work on Bush and Company projects after January 1, 1987. No definite plans have been made concerning the handling of the President's current workload, estimated at 7 hours out of a 14-hour workday, which includes non-Bush and Company assignments. In addition, the project manager proposed for this project is currently a HUD employee. Bush and Company informed us the individual is considering either a 6-month leave of absence or a separation from HUD to fill this position. We believe a legal opinion should be obtained from the Office of General Counsel if a leave of absence is pursued. In either case, the ability of Bush and Company to satisfactorily fill this and other proposed positions should be confirmed prior to award. So what the IG says, and I'll give you a copy. You have a copy. This is August 25, 86. The Inspector General, and it's, I think, not routine to have proposals submitted so carefully reviewed by the IG, so there's probably concern about it, says, he questions practically all of the costs. He says that the pricing is based not on historical data, not on reasonable costs that are expected to be incurred, but on the amount of money available for the award. So it's sort of reverse engineering. Then it says the person in charge currently working 12 hours a day without this project, so it's questionable how much additional time he can devote to it. And maybe a HUD employee will take a leave, and they question the legality of this to run this project. So it doesn't appear to be a project of great merit, according to the Inspector General. I don't know if you'd care to comment.
I've never seen this before. I think you'll find the comments of Mr. Govan much more meaningful than my comments on this, because he's the one who did work on it.
Mr. Chairman, if I may just address,
please.
I just saw this. We have not seen this before, but since it comes from the Office of Inspector General, there would be the implication, which I think would be erroneous, that somehow this was being investigated for some wrongdoing by Bush and Company. And this appears to be to the Director of Office of Procurement and Contracts from the Director of Audit Operations, and it seems to be, and I have no knowledge whatsoever of HUD procedures, but they just say they are against funding it at this time, but apparently this is somewhat of a routine type of...
I don't think so.
I don't know.
I don't think so at all, Counsel. What the IG is saying is, well, I just read to you what he's saying, that he says that the cost of the project is arrived at not on the basis of a historical experience, but on the basis of how much money is available for this kind of a project. I mean, it's reverse engineering. You see how much money there is for this thing at this moment, then you put together a project to fit that dollar amount. And he says that's the wrong way about. And then he says the person who was going to run it is already working a 12-hour day. Then he says maybe a HUD employee will take a leave to run it, and he questions the legality of it. I mean, these are the Inspector General's statements, not ours.
Again, we haven't had the benefit of seeing this before, and I just see on the general comments they talk about, we recommend no award be made until your office reviews and determines that no duplication of effort or the staff proposed for the project is actually available at levels proposed. So again, I just, want to make the statement that apparently this is not regarding any wrongdoing whatsoever by Bush and Company, and I would think it's, since it's going to the procurement and contracts from an audit operations, this is maybe a routine procedure.
Well, it cannot deal with wrongdoing because the project has not yet been awarded and no funds have been expended. It raises enormous skepticism about the project for all of the reasons listed in the IG report. I mean, if you submit a report to HUD, you would expect a somewhat more favorable evaluation than one which says all of the cost proposals are to be questioned and they haven't got the staff to do the job.
Again, Mr. Chairman, we cannot defend the internal processes. We're not aware of what they are.
I'm not asking you to defend it, Counsel. I'm merely making this available to you because the witness's testimony indicated that there was an initial proposal which was then refined and improved in the process. That's not what the IG is saying. The IG is questioning $270,000 out of $290 that are proposed to be spent. He says they haven't got the staff to do it.
Well, I view it differently than the chairman does.
Well, that's your privilege.
Right, and I view it where they talk about confirming certain information prior to the award being made, and this is the IG's language. I think that infers that perhaps this proposal is not that out of line whatsoever. But again, we can't get in the position. Mr. Bush has no knowledge of what the procedures are and what the real concerns are. And
but the real concerns of the Inspector General of the Department of Housing and Urban Development are laid out in his report. Congressman Frank.
A couple questions about the sequence.
Please.
On this, because I'm interested in the conditional report, the conditional approval motion, the proposal for a technical assistance grant here to help maximize the efficiency of CDBG, to whom did that proposal first go in HUD? Who first saw it at HUD?
I don't know that.
Well, did it go in at the technical level or did it go in at the political level? Did it go, I mean, at what point did you or a member of your firm talk to anybody at HUD about it?
The very first time?
Yeah.
The very first time that we talked, this is the best of my recollection, the first time we talked to anybody about this, well, we talked to the mayor.
Yeah, he's not at HUD.
I know. And this was his priority of his. He knew.
Mr. Bush, please answer my question. What's
I'm
the
trying
first?
to remember.
No, but no. When you tell me it's a priority of the mayor, that has nothing to do with my question. What was the first point, and at what level did you or a representative of your firm talk to HUD about this proposal?
I believe, to the best of my recollection, that I called Deborah Dean.
Okay. Was that before or after you received? It had been submitted formally to HUD.
This was before.
And
to the best of my recollection.
All right, you talked to Deborah Dean first, then it was submitted.
Yeah.
At what point? Then it got.
She referred us to Mr. Gilliam.
Who was?
He was what was he then? One of the deputy assistant secretaries.
Okay. And you talked to him then?
Yes.
And then submitted it?
Then I was out of it myself.
But it was then submitted, presumably by the mayor.
Yes.
And at that point, it was given a conditional approval. At what point did the staff make a negative recommendation? Do you know?